Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, it is 8:30. I see all of the committee members here, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. First up, approval of minutes. Any changes to the minutes, Councilmember Jurenski or Sundberg?
No.
Nothing.
On the consent calendar, any objection to approving items 3A through 3D? All of this was backup information provided.
I have no objections.
No objections.
With that, consent calendar is approved. We'll go into general business. First up, item 4A, police records operation update. Who's going to be the presenter on this initially? Looks like Lieutenant Parvent.
Well, this is Jim Twombly. Let me start off with a little bit of an overview, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
What we'd like to do is start off with just kind of walking through a timeline of the events. There's been a lot of discussion about things happening at different times, and so I think it'd be helpful just to walk through that timeline, starting with when the police auditor began the audit of the CCJRA records. Following that, we'd like to hear from PRI about the report that they presented to the city, and then finally we'll hear from APD from Lieutenant Brett Parvin and John Schneebeck. So if it's okay, we'll go ahead and start off with that timeline and call on Michelle Gardner to walk us through that.
Right.
I'm sorry, Michelle Crawford.
No worries. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Michelle, the police auditor for the city. So last April on the 11th, I started the CCJRA audit, which is the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act audit. That audit was part of the 2021 police audit plan. Now, internal audit follows a risk-based approach in selecting our audits for our plans. And the police audit plans specifically focus on policies and practices that impact the community, potentially high liability areas, and those of significant public concern. Also of note is the 2022 police audit plan included in risk observations. The areas for management to continue to monitor included the records unit operations. Jim, did you want to talk about the reason for selection of CCJRA?
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess for those who don't know what that acronym is, could you talk about that a little bit, and then why that was a risk area for us?
Yeah, so CCJRA is the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act, and so that is how police releases records requests. So requests for accident reports, victim reports, those all go through the CCJRA process. I believe that was selected due to concerns with compliance and kind of, I believe, the timeliness of release of reports is why that was originally suggested for addition to the 2021 police audit plan.
Yeah, and so the timeliness is governed by state statutes, I believe. So that's the compliance issue. But then there's also kind of a customer service aspect to that in terms of the types of records that are requested sometimes are related to accident reports and things like that, where insurance companies, our residents might have insurance payments held up because of the records not being released timely. Is that right?
Correct. So CCJRA doesn't have as strict turnaround times as CORA, but there are certain times selected, and it does impact people getting their accident reports or their other types of reports. The timeliness can definitely impact those.
Okay.
In May of 2021, there was a budget request from police for 10 additional staff for the records unit.
Yeah, and on that, I'd just like to comment that when that request came through, because Michelle was already working in the records section, and we meet bi-weekly for updates, and I already understood that there were a lot of process and organizational type issues there. I discussed with Michelle that request to get some insight into how helpful additional staff would be in terms of dealing with some of those problems. And the response at that time was that because it was so difficult to, because I guess the processes and organization were in such maybe disarray is a strong word, but things were not being processed smoothly, that it was really difficult to tell what additional personnel would do. The other thing was that there were a number of vacancies, unfilled vacancies in that section already, and the determination was to be best to get those vacancies filled first and also work on some of the processes and then see what the need would be. So we did deny that request at the time until we had a better handle on what was going on and those vacant positions could be filled.
On June 15th, 2021, members of the City Innovation Design Team, at the request of the city manager, began to work with the records section to look at processes and try to identify any efficiencies and any areas where they could assist in improving the processes.
Yeah, and just to let you know a little bit about that innovation design team, we have a group of employees that meet regularly who have backgrounds in Lean Six Sigma or process or continuous improvement. And so we pulled together a group of about 5 of them to go in and look at the entire record section and try to look at ways to improve their processes and practices, because as Michelle was noting, it wasn't just in the CCJRA area, but all areas there were backlogs that needed to be cleared up. And so we brought that team in to help with that.
And on August 2nd of 2021, the Innovation Design Team, along with record staff and EPD personnel, met to discuss the transcription processes and identified looking at the transcription priority codes and simplifying those and giving additional guidance on the use of those to sergeants in order to help identify those high priority cases within the queue. On September 20th, 2021, that team then presented those proposed new transcription priority codes to PD command staff, and those codes were updated and went live on September 23rd, 2021. On October 20th, 2021, the Innovation Design Team provided a report to city management after holding meetings with all of records staff and supervisors. The recommendation was for an RFP for an outside party to assist with the people areas of project and processes for an evaluation of the records section. At that time, there were approximately 1,086 total outstanding reports in the transcription queue.
Michelle, can you please repeat that? At this time, this date was this one you just said, this was October 21st?
October 20th, 2021.
October 20th. And when you say provided input or feedback back to city management, who is that specifically?
There was a memo the Innovation Design Team sent that went to Deputy City Manager Jason Batchelor and to Jim Tompley. City manager.
So it went to both of them?
It did.
Okay. And at that time, how many needed to still be transcribed?
I believe at that time, and this fluctuates day to day based off of in and out, I believe what we looked at was, our number was 1,086 is what was outstanding on October 20th.
And let me comment on that, because actually that number, that 1,086, was just provided to us yesterday by the police department. At the time of that report, the IDT team noted about 900 in the queue. So as Michelle said, that's a dynamic number. It's records go through transcription, new records come in, so it is changing. But the IDT team noted about 900 at the time. I will say also that was I think a 6 or 7 page report that they provided, and they listed over 30 recommendations for improvements that could be made that they had identified just in their short time there. At that time, we knew that it was certainly more than that design team could handle, simply because they're full-time employees with full-time jobs in other areas of the city.
Councilmember Zavana, can I ask another question, please, about this?
Go ahead.
Time frame here on October 20th. Okay, and also when we're saying we sent a memo, I'm assuming that's this design team. So this memo was sent to Jason Batchelor and to Jim Twombly, but where is John Schneebeck, Darren Parker, and Vanessa Wilson and all of that? Were they sent this? Were they made aware of this? Were they notified of this on October 20th?
So John's been one of our contacts throughout for the innovation design team, where we hold regular meetings with him and go through that information. And I believe he was provided this memo. I can't say exactly when, but these were based off of our the initial conversations with the record staff. And the way the process worked was we identified the processes and projects and then asked them to prioritize for us as a staff and what they saw as the highest priority. And so we were using that in order to identify what areas the innovation design team could assist with and what areas we could not.
And council member, I would add to that the memo came to me with Jason on there because I was the one who sent the innovation design team in there. So they were basically reporting to me. I assume, I can't say, but I would assume that between Jason and John Schneebeck that department leadership was provided that same information.
Well, I don't want to assume anything at this point. I need to know. We need to track this down, and maybe we need to do core requests or something. But I want to know who on October 20th. I understand this memo went to you and to Jason Batchelor, but there's 3 people missing in this scenario right here, and I understand maybe you're the one who sent them in, and I am very, very grateful for that. And so maybe they thought they needed to report to you, but we have deputy city managers for a reason, and we have a chain of command for a reason. And I want to know where the break in communication is. That's what I want to know. I want to know where these memos went. We're assuming that a memo went to John Schneebeck. We're assuming a lot of things. I think we're past assuming. So I want facts. I want to know where these memos went. I also want to just recap before we go any further what you had said in April when this first initial, it was the way it was just worded was back in April, we sent out for additional staffing. Michelle, please, who is we? Who sent out, who asked for additional staffing back in April, and who did that come from?
I am not part of that process. We developed this timeline interactively, so I'll have to let city management address as far as when requests for staffing came in.
And I can. So it was part of the police department budget request for FY22, and those are generally, I don't have the exact date, but those are generally sent into the budget office in a May timeframe, and then reviewed by management in early June to mid-June as we're putting together the budget.
Too many broad statements for me. Who sent in this request? Who sent in this budget request for staffing? Who sent that?
The department director, the police chief in this case, would be the one that transmits that to the budget office.
Do we have that? Do we have a copy of that email?
We have a copy of, it's called their service level, whatever, adjustment request. So we have a copy of that, yes.
And management reviews this. Again, too broad for me. Jason Batchelor reviewed this budget request.
Management would be the budget director, budget officers, myself, deputy city managers.
Do the budget director and the budget officers, were they aware of this situation? I'm not certain that these are departments that would talk to each other. So would the budget director and the budget officers know that we had this backlog going, know that we were having this problem in records before they make a decision whether or not we authorize additional staffing? Were they made aware of
Yep.
problem in records?
We discussed the issue in records. It was my decision to deny the request based on my discussion with Michelle.
And that was because what sort of conversation did you and Michelle have?
The reasons that I stated before about the issues of processes that appeared to be broken, systems that weren't working, vacancies that were already part of the records section that needed to be filled. So those were the considerations.
So you wanted to prioritize maybe fixing a broken system before we add more people to it? Was that your thought process?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. We can continue.
So on October 20th, there was an approval for 5 additional FTEs for records. On November 19th, 2021, the RFP was released. On December 13th, 2021, the CCJRA audit was finalized and released. March 7th through the 10th of 2022, the vendor that was selected through the RFP was on site. On May 10th, 2022, I presented the records audits to the Public Safety Committee. And on March
You just
4th,
said May.
March.
March. Sorry. And then on March 14th, 2022, the supplementary report from PRI was received. And then
Say that
today,
last one. The supplement was received what date?
I have on the timeline is March 14th.
March 15th. That's when the report came out.
It was, yes, that's when PRI sent the report initially. And that is the timeline.
And just for everybody's situational awareness, the JRA presentation that Michelle presented to the public safety meeting is available online, both the presentation and the findings of that report. And it was on the heels of this, it was actually presented at the last public safety meeting before this one. Presented it, it raised some concern among all of us on this committee. And I actually talked about it in the subsequent council meeting, brought it up as an issue because the findings in it were alarming to all of us. But if for those of you who want to see that report and its findings, you can go back to the public safety meeting from last month. Jim?
Yes.
How do you want to go next?
Yeah, if you're ready to move on, we can go on to PRI.
Yep.
And Ed Claughton from PRI.
Morning, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, well, my name is Ed Claughton. I'm here to do a brief presentation for you regarding an update on the police record staffing study program, or project rather. You have to forgive me. I built this presentation thinking that this was a large public presentation, in City Hall with the big public presence. So it doesn't appear to be that way. So some of the, perhaps some of the comments or language in the presentation you will see is kind of geared towards a public interest perspective.
I think that's still appropriate.
Good, appropriate?
Yeah, it's still appropriate. Absolutely.
Okay. Let me see if I can share my screen correctly here. So if you'd let me know if you can see it. Give me 1 second. That showing up okay?
Yes.
All right, so what I'll do is go over the presentation agenda. I'll begin by laying the ground rules. Again, I plugged that in primarily under the assumption that this was a very large public presentation. Number 2, I'll give you a quick background on our company. 3, we'll go over the scope of the project and our methodologies. Number 4, I'll cover the findings thus far in our work. And then 5, I'd like to correct some very serious misinformation that's been reported in the news regarding this project and our company. So the presentation is short. It seems like a lot of information perhaps based on that agenda, but it is relatively short. Nonetheless, I do have a lot of information to cover. And so I would appreciate getting through that without any interruptions. We certainly encourage the City of Aurora and all involved stakeholders to remain objective and focused on public safety first, and recognizing and acknowledging the level and extent of the issues in the records section, and to commit to collaborative reform, which we certainly support. Our work on the project is ongoing. We're not yet finished. We will be issuing a final detailed report upon completion of the project, probably in the next month to 2 months, we are estimating. Ultimately, our work, serves to ensure the safety of the citizens of Aurora through timely and accurate police information, as well as the safety of police personnel, which is in large part contingent upon their access to such information. Who is PRI? We are an independent public safety information management and technology consulting and training firm founded in 2008. We have conducted these kinds of projects around the United States. We have clients, police agency clients in over 40 states around the country. And our records management model is one which serves as, in fact, an industry standard that is designed to turn dysfunctional records management operations into successful ones. Proper information management is at the heart of any kind of organization, and in a police agency, it's very important. It is what provides for correct allocation of resources, proper law enforcement action based upon accurate records and data, accurate analysis of crime trends, protection of civil liberties, and prevention of other crimes occurring due to misinformation. And I will give you an example of that at the end of the presentation here in just a couple of minutes. So what we were hired to do is primarily two key things. First, determine what the required staffing level is in the record section as it operates today. Secondly, we are required to determine what the required staffing level would be if the operation was performing or operating at peak performance based upon our recommendations. This is done by completing what's called a time and motion study. Time and motion study involves a very thorough, comprehensive analysis of the unit in question, of course, in this case, the record section at the police department, and that includes conducting analysis of business processes, workflows, and data, analyses of work schedules, work allocation, and organizational structure, analysis of work backlogs, determining workload, and time measurements. And that last point there is at the heart of these kinds of operations. And what we do is we begin by inventorying each and every work task within the record section. So we come up with a list collaboratively with their staff in combination with our own expertise in that very specific area. We've all worked in police records, and we make a list of all the things that they do, each and everything. And then we determine what is the average time that it takes an employee to complete each of those tasks. And ultimately that information is plugged into our model, into a spreadsheet, and we're able to determine the staffing levels. Our recommendations are always based on objective fact-finding information gathering and analysis, and all of that information, of course, will be provided to the city when we are finished. So some findings thus far. The critical level of backlog reports, which included over 2,500 police incident and supplemental reports back in March, is now down to a little over 400. So that's substantial positive progress in the right direction. There are currently over 6,000 backlogged court-ordered record seals and expungements that have been locked. These are records that have been locked but not processed in full according to the mandates of those court orders and state law. There are 150 plus Colorado Criminal Information Center programs second-party checks which are pending. These are checks that serve to ensure that information from police reports regarding things like stolen property, stolen weapons, stolen vehicle, or recovered property, missing or recovered persons, warrant information. Those kinds of records are entered into the Colorado Bureau of Investigation systems, as well as the FBI National Criminal Information Center. And this second-party check process is what ensures the absence of mistakes in those records. And when there are mistakes in those records, those mistakes are fed out to the rest of law enforcement across the state and across the country, and can lead to improper law enforcement action. There's over 1,700 plus, currently 1,700 plus public records requests, which are backlogged at the police department. It should be noted, the record section attempted a number of process improvement changes over the last 2 years, designed to increase efficiencies, including retooling paper-driven procedures, creating better storage methods for certain types of electronic records, maximizing the use of Microsoft Teams internally, and improving internal communications strategies. None of them, however, directly, and I emphasize directly, addressed reducing the backlogs, the aforementioned backlogs. And unfortunately, some of these changes should not have been done and actually made those backlogs worse. And I'll get into now what some of those things are. One of the first things we recognized is a failure to recognize the level of risk created by the backlog, and thus a lack of urgency given to its resolution, as I documented in my March 14th update. And at the end of this presentation, again, I'm going to give you a case study, an example of that kind of risk and why it is so urgent and what the ramifications are. We identified a broken organizational structure both inside and outside of records. About 2 years ago, the records section was essentially split into two distinct separate operations. And that bifurcation of the operation and of the work led to very inconsistent completion of work tasks. You took a team of employees and split them into two. And that led to the work that needed to be conducted cohesively and consistently on a daily, hourly basis not being done that way. And it came down to an improper scheduling as a result, scheduling of personnel. Additionally, we identified a couple of organizational structures concerns outside of records, one of which included there were 2 or 3, if I remember correctly, police records related personnel. I think their title may be front desk clerks or something of that nature that work at the police department, which used to work under records. And those people, for unknown reasons, were transferred under the command of the 2nd District. But yet they are doing police-related work at the front counter, and their time is not being maximized to do the work that is needed in the record section. That's going to be one of the key changes that we recommend, is bring them back under the operation of the record section. And additionally, in the chain of command, you have a level of records just above the line level personnel, the records technicians. You have records leads and supervisors, a records manager, a business services manager who is a civilian without law enforcement experience. And then above that, you're into police command staff, executive level command staff at the police department who directly don't oversee the record section. And there's a huge gap in supervision and executive level management of this area of the operation by people who have that kind of required law enforcement experience, particularly investigative experience. And hence, that's why I made one of the recommendations in my March 14th update to at least put a police lieutenant over the operation who can help prioritize the work in that area. And that's one of the problems that we saw, is there was a inadequate prioritization of this backlog of work. Some records employees have, I believe, up until very recently, were allowed to continue working from home. Others were allowed to work hybrid, and yet others were required to be in the office. There was a lot of internal resentment among staff because of that. And again, that leads to the bifurcation of work, and inconsistency and inability of being able to monitor their performance. The folks that work from home, there were no performance measures assigned to their work, tracked, documented, and so nobody could tell us in our interviews what was being done by those employees who were working from home. Could you tell us if the work was being successfully completed? Were there some kind of tracking mechanisms? And there were not. Improper scheduling of personnel and allocation of work, therefore, resulted from these things. Some work tasks are done on one shift only, while other work tasks are split across shifts. The record section is conducting a wide variety of tasks which should be assigned to other resources, including the municipal court, the Aurora 911 Center, and police officers themselves who need more access to systems and to tools to be more self-sustaining. We're going to recommend a number of tasks be reassigned to those entities, and that's going to help get the work that they should be doing honed in and focused on. Reallocating work to other places where that work should be will have a very positive impact on the operation. Ultimately, a belief that the backlogs are strictly, and I emphasize strictly, due to understaffing has taken root within the police department. and thus there was a neglect to evaluate and address the other causes and to develop appropriate resolution. It's important, really important for you folks to note that our work is still in progress, and the data that we need to determine what the staffing levels need to be, we're still collecting that data, so we don't know the staffing numbers yet. It may say they need more people. It may say they don't need more people. I don't know yet. We've identified the underlying root issues, and this data is the last thing that we will, as always, it's the last piece of information that we collect to determine staffing. So that's forthcoming. Another issue, mandatory overtime and minimum staffing requirements are not enforced. Records employees are essentially allowed to work when they want to. And so just about every supervisor we spoke to said that when they call employees to come in on overtime or to work because they are understaffed, the employees are allowed to neglect doing that and can make a choice. I'm not coming in. And so this suggests ineffective supervision and management in and over the record section. The volume of the backlog should never have reached critical mass, and they should never have been allowed to reach critical mass. And as I alluded to in my March 14th report, what can happen when that happens? Delayed quality control, which poses serious risk and liability to the organization. And again, I'll give you a case study on that at the very end, coming up here in just a minute. The city responded to our March 14th update with a number of positive changes in records operations, which we concur with. And these changes have certainly led to short-term success. The city manager's office has published a list of those changes. I would imagine that those have been published to your leadership team as well. We will be making additional recommendations in our final report. If these recommendations are strategically and successfully implemented with appropriate planning, oversight, and ongoing evaluation, they will resolve the problems in the record section. This success will be contingent upon having much more accountability and much better supervision in and over the record section. So lastly, I'm going to cover some of the news reporting, or at least correct some of the news reporting that's been stated about us and about this project. It's very important to clarify. Subsequent to our March 14th update report, absolutely false and misleading information was and continues to be published in the media. So please note the following. This study did not include evaluating any individual employee performance. It's not what we were hired to do. And nor was our work in any way, shape, or form, in any way whatsoever, intended to disparage, smear, or impact the employment of the chief of police. PRI did not state that as a result of the backlogs in the record section, criminals are out running free. PRI did not state that all of the backlog cases were not being investigated. What we did say, and I quote the report, quote, as a result of the delays in processing police reports, violent crimes reported to the police department may not, and I emphasize, may not be investigated for months, enabling suspects who might, and I emphasize might, otherwise have been investigated and taken into custody to reoffend. I also recognized in my report that the police department certainly pulls things out of the transcription queue and immediately responds to cases that require immediate response, like a murder, obviously. A murder is a number one example. Those cases are not sitting and lingering. And so the report said, and I quote, in some situations, detectives are directly advised of serious crimes and specifically request to have reports transcribed or approved so they can be printed or filed for prosecution. The case is then processed and removed from the transcription queue. So what are the ramifications? What are the risks and liabilities that can happen when there are delays in the efforts at a police department as industry standard, when there are delays in the efforts of quality control? Backlogs in the transcription process, and in the Colorado Criminal Information Center, as every state has their own state level program, their second party required and legally regulated process, the second party check process. Those delays in those areas unequivocally create risk. And that risk stems from the delay in the ability and the timeliness of catching potential mistakes of information in police reports. Case in point, a records mistake in the South Carolina mass murder. In 2015, a suspect went to purchase a gun in South Carolina at a gun store. And when you go to a gun store to buy a weapon legally, you fill out a form that is instantly submitted to the National Instant Criminal History Check program run by the FBI to confirm your eligibility for buying a firearm. And in this case, the gun store filled out the paperwork. They sent that paperwork to the FBI, and this suspect in this case had been arrested for Schedule III narcotics possession and disqualified him from being able to purchase weapons. When the FBI background examiner reviewed that case, the process, let me quickly explain the process. What happens is the FBI contacts the arresting agency to verify that information, to verify the arrest and or the conviction in that case. And when the FBI examiner ran the check on this suspect, they discovered that he had recently been arrested. And the FBI contacted what was listed as the arresting agency on the booking paperwork. A records employee at the jail who booked this suspect entered one little bit of misinformation into a field within the record system. And that misinformation was the name of the arresting agency was incorrect. The records person entered the name of the booking facility instead of the name of the arresting agency of the suspect. So when the background examiner called what was listed as the arresting agency, the person said, "We have no record of such suspect. You need to call this other agency." Well, there are 3 days. The federal law requires or allows for, I should say requires 3 days to complete a background check for the purchase of a firearm. And if the background check is not conducted within that 3-day time period, the law says the person is automatically approved upon the discretion of the gun store, of the firearm store, is automatically approved to purchase that weapon. It's a loophole. When the background examiner contacted, or at least attempted to contact, the true correct arresting agency of the suspect, he couldn't reach anybody. Got voicemails, time went by, and the 3-day time period passed. And the suspect was authorized and legally purchased that firearm, which he was not allowed to buy, and used that gun to turn around and kill 9 innocent people at a church in South Carolina. Now, that's a risk. And that risk was due to a mistake in records. And so I want to make that very clear to the general public and to the media. There's no question that this is a high-risk area. Now, to the department's credit, they have rapidly taken response, appropriate response to our March 14th update. And within, I think that report was issued on March 14th. And within we were a little over 3 weeks, I think, later, they've reduced that backlog to reduced it to 400 plus. How do we know it is possible some crimes may not have been investigated for 3 months or for several months? 3 things. 1, APD employees themselves told us so. As our March 14th update further stated, and I quote, "We asked employees in our interviews if it was possible serious criminal offenses could be in the queue, which have been overlooked and not investigated. And every single one of them told us yes." Secondly, during one of those interviews with a detective, that detective had brought his laptop to the interview with me. I did this I was the one doing this particular interview, and he opened the laptop and opened the transcription queue. And within about, I'd say, less than a minute, as he flips through the queue, he spots an aggravated child abuse case, which had been sitting in the queue for over a month, unassigned for investigation. He openly acknowledged this was missed, and he openly recognized that this was a problem. And thirdly, over 28 years of including me, 28 years of individual consultant law enforcement expertise, and over 65 years of collective experience among our team is assigned to this project. And we are well aware of the ramifications of the risks that come with these kinds of backlogs. Lastly, PRI will continue working to address the needs of the city of Aurora objectively. We will continue to and to provide the knowledge and expertise that is needed to resolve the issues that we have identified. The entire team and I fully support accountability in law enforcement, advancing professionalism in policing, and implementation of the reform efforts that clearly the city has had underway in the city of Aurora for some time. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ed. Before I'm going to open it up to questions from my colleagues here shortly, but I just thank you for that presentation. Since this report was made public, it's unfortunately been turned into a political issue, and I think that the parallel timing of its release with the firing of Chief Wilson has clearly contributed to that reality. I know that for me, when this 4-page report was released to members of council and to the public by city management, there were a number of alarming red flags, including the case study that you cited within the records department. And the suggestion was that the backlog demanded immediate attention and had the potential for serious public safety issues for our city. And it sounds like you stand by that. I believe it would have been irresponsible for those of us who received this information to not bring it forward. And I'm certain that the same people who are now critical of our efforts to highlight the report would have likely accused us of trying to cover up a failure within the police department had we not. And so I know you've talked a lot about the article that was published yesterday that alleges the information that was presented to council by city management and by your firm was factually inaccurate. And one of the immediate contradictions that I see, and I just heard you talk about it again, was when you talked to, it says, in your interviews with staff, they asked if it was possible that serious criminal offenses could be in the queue and have been overlooked and not investigated. All said yes. In the newspaper article, they say that city staff, or they actually say officials, and I assume that means city staff and police officials, charged that many of the assertions in the report weren't factual. And notably, they said that the data entry backlog was unlikely to have delayed any investigations. They said any investigations. This is what's being reported by the Aurora Sentinel. Is that factual?
Is what they're reporting factual?
Yes.
Absolutely not. It is materially false information. And I vehemently will argue that, and our final report will show you the evidence for that. It's very, very incorrect information.
So the other tacit allegation, and I want you to answer this very directly, and you touched on it. There's been some accusations that this report was brought forward as an effort to try to smear the chief of police. Have you had any conversations with any city employee, any city council member that suggested that they wanted this to come forward in order to smear the chief of police, the former chief of police?
Absolutely not. I have zero. This is the first time I've ever had any discussions with any City of Aurora elected officials. Never had any previous contact. I wasn't even aware of the efforts regarding her performance that had come out in the public news. Not within our scope of work. We were not directed to do that. That is absolutely false.
Okay. This one's for city management. In the article that ran yesterday, there was a quote in there by acting Captain Chris Amsler, said that that none of the cases at all were impacted, or there was no investigations impacted by this. Can somebody respond why the city would be telling the Aurora Sentinel that this is the case if in fact it's not true?
Well, I'll address that. No one from police or city staff has presented facts or research to me that proves that there's not been an impact. I was not involved in that discussion with the Aurora Sentinel. I'm not disputing those statements. However, I have to reserve judgment about its accuracy until we can research timelines of crimes, transcriptions, and initiation of investigations. I will say that investigators and officers did in the fall, I believe, once we had the change the priorities, they developed workarounds to where they could initiate investigations, where they could look into records that were in the queue. However, I will say, as Mr. Claughton mentioned, that the transcription process is a quality control process to make sure that all the information is accurate and that the information is complete in those records. And so if we have investigators looking at those records while they're in the queue, they're subject to looking at incomplete or inaccurate information. So in terms of, two people with the same names, addresses where numbers are transposed, things like that, are types of information that could be misinformation and lead to an impact on investigations taking place. So, like I said, I was not in the conversation with the Sentinel, but that's city management's position at this point.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, just 1 second. Can I just have one quick follow up to that? So what I've heard Ed suggest was that he had a detective pull up an instance in front of him of a case that was backlog or held up because of the backlog. So we know that happened. And then we have a police captain saying that that's not the case at all and printed in the newspaper. The thing that's bothersome to me is that this issue, instead of trying to focus on what is a potentially very serious threat to our city, this backlog potentially poses a serious threat to our city. And instead of focusing on that, there's such a desperate effort to discredit it that we're now having quotes from city officials in the paper that is countering a report that was put out by this firm. So I want to know, was this an accurate statement that is not the case at all, given that we know that in fact that's not true?
Captain Chris Amsler is on the call. I would like to actually have him answer this. Jim, I appreciate your response, but I would like this police officer to answer to his own words to the Sentinel.
Good morning. During that part of the conversation, we were talking about violent crimes such as homicide and other cases that were investigated by our Major Crimes Investigations Unit. So during that, I was basing my comment off of conversations that I had had with them about the fact that they were not aware of any cases, serious cases that had been investigated. So in my quote, I said, "We do not believe," which I was referring to at that time. The case that is mentioned in the case that was just brought up about that's been sitting in the queue, I was not aware of that case when I made that comment.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Go ahead, Councilmember Drinsky.
So I just to follow up to that. So Captain Amsler, so do you feel you were misquoted in the Sentinel? Do you feel, I mean, what are your thoughts to this? Have you had a chance to read what your words were put out in the Sentinel as?
Yes, I did see the statement that was made by me. And again, like I said, when we're having that conversation, we're again talking about serious crimes such as murders. And I was referring to some of the cases that were in the spreadsheet that I was provided that PRI had at the time. So those were cases that I was referring to.
So do you feel that the Sentinel possibly omitted the portion, the portion of crimes that you were talking about, or I mean, I'm just trying to figure this out.
Yes, that could have been the case. Again, like I said, I was referring to those major crimes cases such as homicides, serious child abuses, kidnappings, those type of cases.
But you in no way feel confident enough to say that absolutely it didn't hold up the investigation of any of these 2,512 crimes.
No, when it comes to some of those minor cases, I probably misspoke on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ed or the team? Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. I don't have anything yet. Thank you.
I guess, Ed, I have one last question. And again, it's as a result of some of the suggestions that this type of backlog, and I think you've covered it, but I would just, again, for the record, I mean, do you view this type of backlog in the records department as a potential issue, serious public safety issue for the city of Aurora?
I do.
Okay.
Councilmember Zvonek, I do have a couple more questions. Sorry.
Yep. Go ahead. That's fine.
Ed, thank you so much for the presentation and for your work on this. I'm not sure it would have ever come to our attention otherwise. So I really appreciate that. I just want to know, and maybe this is just an opinion, I just want to know, why do you feel, or what do you think, why this, Chief Wilson has now come out and said that your report is convenient. Was her in her office? I know that city management was aware that you were here and you were in the city and you were running this office, running this audit. Was Chief Wilson and her office aware that you were also in the city and running this audit?
She was aware that we were there. I met her briefly, I think the first or second day of our visit.
Sure. That's great. So the chief's office was absolutely aware that you were there to run this audit and find out what the problems were. I also want to find out, you have an extensive background in this. Have you ever seen when a report comes out, when an audit comes back and it's as bad as ours is, have you ever seen it lead to termination within the police department and or within city management?
If that's happened, I'm not aware of it. It could have happened after our work. I haven't seen terminations occur during the scope of our work, or not that I'm aware of. So
And you've never been involved in any kind of conversations to terminate anybody in these organizations that you've been hired to do this work for? Nothing
Never.
like.
Never.
Have you ever been asked to give an opinion of whether or not someone in an organization should be fired, or have you never even been asked even to give your opinion on that?
Never been asked, and if it's not within the scope of our work, I wouldn't do so. Unless we were hired to do an evaluation of employee performance, other than that, we would not do that. And no, I have not been asked.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Jim, is there any more information that you want to present on this topic? You're on mute, Jim.
For me, we do still have the police department presentation from Lieutenant Parvin and John Schneebeck.
Great.
It's the ability to share to Matt Wells Longshore. Okay, we're good to, you can see it now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes. My name is Brett Parvin. I'm a lieutenant with the police department. I was the previous lieutenant to the records unit about 5 years ago. My position was civilianized. I was there for 2.5 years. And I was brought over about 2 or 3 weeks ago to, after the initial arrival, to take over. I was going to introduce John. He's my left. John Schneebeck's my supervisor. He's the manager of business services. I've also have Amy Farnham. She's not in the room. She's virtual. She's my senior supervisor in records. So if there's any questions that are real minutia of how records operates, I'll have her answer some of those. I'm going to talk about 4 different things. A little bit of background on kind of how the process works, where we were when this report was initiated, where we are currently, and where we're going. So the life cycle of report: crime is reported, officer responds, interviews, does his investigation or her investigation, writes the report, submits that to a supervisor queue for approval. The supervisor reviews the report, either approves it as is or sends it back for errors, and then approves it again after that. And after that has been looked at by a supervisor and approved, it goes into the transcription queue, which is for record section. Transcription is a term that's used by our vendor for Versadex for quality control measures. So when we refer to transcription, that's what it is. It's the records going through it, making sure that everything is done correctly. I'll explain that a little bit more. The reports are then transcribed in the order they are prioritized. So the more serious the crime, they are transcribed more quickly. And then they're sent to responsible parties, either courts, they're assigned to detectives for other investigations, or they're closed out. And that's pretty much the basis of how a report works. The couple definitions: general offense report, or what we refer to as a GO, is the initial report documenting how a crime occurred. So officer shows up, they put all the entities in of suspects, witnesses, victims. They do a narrative describing what happened, and then where it's going from there. And that's the initial report for crime. Supplemental report is submitted by other officers on scene, or anybody else involved in the case. And it can be something where somebody interviews another suspect. It can also be something as simple as somebody sitting on a suspect at the hospital, or a supervisor arriving and just making sure everything's okay. They'll do a supplemental report that they were on scene, so that the DAs or the CA attorneys know everything that was involved in the case. Transcription, again, is a Versadex term. Versadex is a system we use for case management. It links every person, vehicle, address, firearm in the report, so it's indexed and searchable. It's used heavily by our crime analysts so that they can track different crime trends and make sure that things aren't getting missed. And then through NIBRS, it's reported on different things that we're required to report. Among law enforcement, there's the verbiage and laws are different per city and state. So part of it too is making sure that it fits what FBI is requiring for their system so that they can track things. So why is it important? What I talked about before, the crime analysts have to see the information. They need correct information. It's the final opportunity for the record staff to make sure everything is correct and coded correctly and sent to the correct unit to investigate. Reports that need to go to detectives are routed to them so they can respond and complete a part of their report. A couple of points on that too is that detectives and basically anyone in the organization at this point has access to get into the transcription queue and look and see what's in there. Detectives are notified when supplementals come through on cases that they're working, so that things don't languish in there for any longer than necessary. One other point on that too is that on serious crimes, homicides, crimes against children, anything that rises to the level of a detective actively working on it quickly, we have notification processes through the watch commander where detectives do respond to those cases. And even if they don't respond, they're notified by phone. So they know to look for those cases the next day when they come into work and they're already working on them. And then reporting the NIBRS for crime statistics, and that's a legal requirement that we report things to the FBI and the CBI, which is Car Bureau Investigation, so that things can be tracked and looked at. So CCIC is the Colorado Crime Information Center. It's what allows us within the state to communicate with each other. So if we search a vehicle that was reported stolen in another agency because we pulled it over, they know that it's in there. It's used for messages, BOLOs, warrants, missing person alerts, missing or stolen firearms, and much more. And I think it's obvious that's imperative that information is correct. We certainly don't want anybody getting pulled over when there was already reported covered when it was and showing stolen. So it's imperative that information is correct, and it has to be looked at for your accuracy and completeness by record staff to make sure that's done properly. So where we were. So when I was assigned over records a few weeks ago, we had the 2,500 reports in the transcription queue. 1,000 of those were from 2021. That says several thousand pending, but that's actually closer to 150. I apologize, that's an error. CCI quality control checks to make sure that the information we're sending to the state is correct. Behind on public records requests. I think that's partly due to that split that Ed was talking about. and then several thousand court-ordered record seals that have not been fully processed. So basically a big backlog. So I'm talking about changes made, and I'm gonna kind of explain why some things I'm doing and some things that I'm waiting for the PRI report to do. So I was brought in March 29th. I immediately ushered all hands on deck attitude towards tackling the problems identified by PRI, specifically on the transcription queue, which we'll get to that, but it's down to 59 this morning. So we made, we're down to where we're supposed to be in I think a relatively short period of time. The main thing I did was bring all record staff back, no more working from home. I instituted 4 hours a week of mandatory overtime for all record staff to either work on the queue or do other tasks while the staff that is highly efficient on working on the queue could focus on that. And then overtime is needed. I also instituted a process for the supervisors to track and monitor what work product the record technicians are putting out when they're not only on their normal hours, but when they're doing overtime. So we can make sure that we're getting basically our money's worth from them, and that they're being as efficient as possible in clearing things out. Like I said, everybody's working from the office, all supervisors working from the office. We're going back to 24/7 supervision within records. You can do the next slide, please. Actually go back one more, I'm sorry. A couple other things I wanted to put on this is that I'm kind of going, for better lack of the term, I'm kind of going old school a little bit. We're moving away from so many Teams meetings to more in-person meetings. I want my supervisors sitting together. I want them hashing out ways to fix things. I think more gets done with my supervisors in person. I've got great supervisors that work for me. We're authorized 7. I've got 6. One's retiring next month. I think that the personal aspect of supervision was missing. And we're doing more empowering the supervisors to make decisions, fix things when they see there's problems quickly. Also bringing in a lot of leadership training for them so that they know what their role is as supervisors and what they're supposed to be focusing on. We also have leads. Leads have kind of been functioning as supervisors a little bit. I'm changing that. Leads are going to be focused on tasks, training, so the supervisors can focus on what they need to be focusing on. The split will be eliminated that Ed was talking about. I appreciate records trying to do something new. It didn't work, and I think it's time to move on from it. However, how that's actually going to look, I really want to wait for the PRI report. We'll make some small changes, but I'm very cognizant in making some massive changes with some stuff and then having to make massive changes again in a month or so when that PRI report came out. So next slide, please. So where we are now, we're at 59 total reports, 98% decrease, which is where we should be. A couple things I wanted to mention too when it comes to transcription queue. Industry standard is a records technician goes through 20 reports in transcription in an 8-hour shift. It's very, very time consuming, and you can see part of why a large staff is needed for an agency our size. We average about 300 new reports coming in a day into records. So that's quite a few records technicians doing nothing more but focus on the transcription queue with all the other things that we do too. So the CCIC checks, I have a supervisor that works for me named Ryan. He is extremely proficient when it comes to technology. He basically, in the last few weeks, created an app and went away from going through PDFs for quality control checks and got those down to 0 almost immediately, just in change of technology that we implemented ourselves within records. And next, okay, so moving forward. So I understand that a big way that we got this queue down so quickly was by mandatory overtime. That's not sustainable forever. It's not a appropriate use of city money. I don't feel like just doing mandatory overtime for years. It also burns out employees. So our vision is to move past that and have processes and overhaul the structure of the records unit so we don't have to rely on it. And there's a few things that we're doing while we're waiting for the PRI report. We're basically creating a command center, which is viewable for all record staff. So TVs will be installed within records on the walls. It'll display a constant for our workload and production output and pending reports so that the supervisors can instantly glance at the numbers, see where they are, and have their technicians delegated appropriately so that things don't get out of control. And I think with no more working from home and supervisors in the office and staff in the office, I think that's going to be a very important thing for everybody to walk in at the start of their shifts when they do their briefings, look and see where we are and where we need to be. We're also implementing auto transcription. That is a new portion of Versadex, which will remove the delay caused by a report need to be transcribed for minor things. So some reports that will, the auto transcription will do some of the work for the technicians. They'll still have to go through it and verify things are correct, but it'll save them time for having to do it. We should go live within that in a couple of weeks. We're doing testing with IT on that, but that's a new feature in Versadex that we're actually very excited about. We're implementing Next Request, which is an online system platform to manage public records requests to speed up that process. And we think that'll increase efficiency and make the process easier for citizens to obtain or police reports. The way it's worked now, especially that split, I feel like is inappropriate for the public to wait as long as they have been. So we're also providing more Versadex report writing training for recruits and recurring training for existing officers and supervisors. There's some things that supervisors can do very quickly that when they go through reports to make it easier on the back end for our records technicians not to have to fix. We're providing them the reason why we really need supervisors to go through the reports correctly, not skim them. It's important that everything in there is correct, and then the records technicians don't have to spend the time on the back end trying to fix it. So that information is going out. One thing is that we have Sergeant Llewellyn, who is assigned over Versadex. I hate comparing us to other agencies, but Denver historically has had a lieutenant and 7 officers assigned to Versadex. We, until recently, have basically had a civilian IT person that did some of it, but we didn't have anybody directly assigned to it the way we have Sergeant Llewellyn. He has other duties too. I think he's doing a great job, but we really need more staff assigned to him to enable with training, make sure that the system is being used correctly. I think we have 1 civilian personnel delegated to start reporting to him. In my opinion, that unit needs to be fleshed out and be taken better care of. I think there's some talk of that going on now. A big issue for us, and I think Ed talked about it, is things that we do that either other agencies don't do or are a huge time suck for us. One, I wanted to point out that we are a 24/7 records unit. The only other one in the state that is 24/7 is Denver. Other agencies tend to have Monday through Friday records offices. And then the dispatch units take over for running warrants and things like that when the records isn't open. Us in Denver don't do it that way. I know our dispatch is severely understaffed as well, so it's hard for them to do. But it's just something to mention. The Aurora Municipal Court historically has not been known for being technologically advanced. They still rely on paper and physical delivery reports rather than electronic reports. We print between 1,000 and 2,000 pages a day in records that we print, sort, and staple. They're picked up daily for cases going to municipal court. Personally, I think that's an easy fix that I think the city should step in with municipal court and talk to them about trying to innovate and get on board with being more modern. That's a massive time suck for us, for the staff that should be focusing on these backlogs. We prepare electronic releases and send them to US boards that basically, my understanding is they're not really even looked at because the court still wants us to print stuff. That is being worked on, and I know that's at a high level right now, but that is a challenge for us. The other issue is we need to be fully staffed, and I know we're waiting for some of the information from PRI, and I'm fully aware that we can solve about any problem just by throwing bodies at it. I mean, the pyramids were built that way. If we have enough bodies, we can basically accomplish anything. But we want to make sure that our bodies in there are functioning appropriately and we have the correct amount. We are currently short 7 technicians. We did interviews last week for 5 openings at the time. We had 2 people interview. I have a supervisor opening now. I have a supervisor retiring in a month. We are not getting the applicants that we once were. When 5 years ago, I would go through stacks of applications for records and could be really picky. Now it's not that way. Part of that is our bigger issues outside the city, but a part of that is our salary range is so low. Our hourly range for records technicians tops out $10 an hour lower than Denver. I can tell you from when I worked in there before, the shift work, the 24 hours, the working holidays, the working weekends, for $20 an hour is brutal for us, and our turnover is super high. Records is not a stepping stone job. It is a professional, very difficult job that takes a long time for us to train somebody in. And the city is working on a compensation study right now through HR, but we have to pay them something that matches the professionalism, how difficult the job is, and that the shift work, or we're going to be in this problem forever. And I believe very strongly in that. Next. And that's my presentation. I'm open to whatever questions you have.
Thank you for that. I have just, I guess it may be a follow-up on what the system, and maybe Ed, you can chime in on this. It seems like the efficient and the very paper-driven system we have right now is not the most effective and efficient. And given the challenges of finding staff and how labor-intensive it is, it seems like that's an easy fix. And I assume now that you mentioned you've done work in over 40 states. Is there better systems out there that exist that can help kind of clean this up, quicker and make it easier for the men and women who are doing this job?
Absolutely. And a quick comment on that. Everything that the lieutenant said is spot on. I concur with 100% of everything that he said. It's absolutely correct. And I commend them for taking swift action after our March 14th report. It's what was needed. And there are much better systems that are out there. There is a small handful of law enforcement records management system vendors with today's technology that is far beyond the system that they have in place at the police department. I think that system is over 20 years old, and the life cycle of technology today, it goes so quickly that what's available today, there is no transcription delay. The system today allow reports and records to be instantaneously accessible and viewable by everybody throughout the agency, regardless if it's still in the quality control process, and that is available today in the VersaDex system, but it's very difficult and to get access to that information to those who have not been trained in how to do that. So yes, I would one of the recommendations you'll see coming from us is getting better technology.
And along those lines, I guess my final question is for both Jim and for Jason. Given the very public and contrived effort to downplay the seriousness of this issue and the report and to discredit PRI, we have a plan forward. And we also had the report from Michelle Crawford earlier that echoed some of the same types of challenges in the record department. Are you confident, given what we've seen in the public, that we're getting accurate information and that this plan to move forward is in fact the best route forward for the police department and for the safety of our city?
Well, a quick question. When you say we're getting accurate information, do you mean through the report and through Lieutenant Parvin's work?
And Michelle, so the recommendations, because right now, as I said, there's a very public effort to minimize this the seriousness of it, and of course the accuracy of it. And if, I want to make sure that you all are confident in PRI and in the work that has been done and say, yes, this is the right direction for us to improve this serious problem. And we're confident we're going to move forward, because my final request on this is going to be that until this is solved, I'd like regular updates at this committee on a monthly basis.
Yes, we'll be sure you get those. And yes, I think we're on the right path. I really want to thank Lieutenant Parvin for his work in expeditiously reducing the queue. That's one thing. When I read the report on March 18th, I immediately shot off an email to the chief and to Jason Batchelor and John Schneebeck, really demanding that we come up with a plan to do just exactly what Lieutenant Parvin has been able to do there. And so want to thank him for that. The other thing I would say is that while it was disappointing to find out what, I guess, the dysfunction of this record section, I am really pleased that we've made the progress that we have. I recognize through the PRI report the risk that we were facing, and I think there can be debate about what level of risk that was. But when we're trying to protect our community and keep our officers safe, we want the minimal risk possible. And so that's what we're shooting for. And so, that's why this all hands on deck effort had to take place, and why also it needs to be sustained. We can't have this be a one-shot deal and then end back up in the same place a year from now. So we have to commit to implementing the recommendations that are provided and funding the recommendations that are provided.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Go ahead, Councilmember Drinsky.
Thank you. I have quite a bit, but on the moving forward screen, and Lieutenant Parvin, thank you for your presentation. On the moving forward screen, it said, you're going to be committed to providing Versadex training. It's my understanding that rank and file officers use a system called PIMS, and that PIMS and Versadex don't communicate. These two systems don't communicate. I would like to find out, I understand moving forward, there's going to be an emphasis on training officers on this Versadex training, and maybe at this point, sergeants, lieutenants above, have been trained on Versadex. But can anybody on this call tell me when the last time a training was held for officers, a patrol, on this Versadex training? I would like to know when this last training was.
Well, I can answer some of that. So PIM stands for Police Information Management System, and that is what Versadex is. So the officers might be talking about, they might be confused with that, but Versadex is what we use for our police management system. As far as training, I know very recently some training was sent out to sergeants by Sergeant Llewellyn. I'm not sure when the last time officers had training on Versadex specifically. Does anybody?
Well, that's routinely done in the academy.
It's done in the academy,
but it's follow-up there.
Follow-up, and that's something that we will institute. I think that is important.
So in the academy, so new recruits, but what about for some of our veteran officers who've been around so long, possibly since before this Versadex was around? Has anybody gone back? It's interesting because Faith Goodrich also quoted in the Sentinel that officers are able to pull up reports that need to be transcribed, that they can pull them up. But I have talked to about 30 officers now who they have never received training on the Versadex. So while Faith Goodrich quote to the Sentinel sounds like there's truth there, that there is the ability for anybody in the department to pull up, you know, this records queue, this transcription queue. But it sounds like, unless you are a newer recruit going through the academy, our police department, rank and file officers, patrol, they have not been trained on Versadex to go be able to pull these reports. And the only way that they would know about them is if they were transcribed in the system and then routed to an investigation sergeant. Is there truth to that?
So Councilmember Jurinsky, this is Faith Goodrich here.
Hi. Hi.
So PIMS, the Police Information Management System, is how officers access Versadex from the computer that is in their car. So it's essentially the same system, but it's kind of just a different icon that they log into. Detectives and officer investigators and sergeants use Versadex when they enter things and approve things. Now, officers can log into Versadex and they can look in that transcription queue, but I think you are correct that that is a hole where we haven't trained them how to do that. So if they haven't done a stint with detectives or some extra training, they may not know how to do that. Now, any report that they write in PIMS that they are involved in and investigating, they can get their own reports. So it's less important that they're able to look at anybody else's reports. Whereas a detective might need to look at 10, 20, 30 reports, you know, to make their case. But I think you're right. There's truth to both statements. They are able to get in there and see all that, but a lot of them probably don't know how.
I don't think there's a probably about it. I think they don't know how. And had you not made that quote to the Sentinel, I don't think that maybe that this would have even, you know, that this hole, this gap in training would have even been exposed. So I thank you for bringing that up, because that allowed me to go look into that. But one thing I wanted to bring up in a scenario, an officer, if they're aware of a crime, sure, they can go look for it. But if they don't know what they're looking for, if an officer is out on patrol and they're responding to the scene of a crime, you know, and they're not able, if they don't know that there has been a crime committed at this address before, or maybe with this individual before, and they haven't been trained on Versadex, then they're not able to see, you know, if they pull up the address or whatever, that there's been an altercation or whatever the crime may be at this address. Is that correct?
Councilmember Jurinsky, I can speak to this. So if there was a previous call for service, that's going to come through dispatch. They're going to notify them that they responded to an assault call at this address, or if there's a name, they'll be able to query the name. But for the road officer, as far as Versadex and being able to access that, really only the detectives would pull those out of the transcription queue for their cases that are investigating. So me as a road sergeant, let's say an officer goes out and takes a serious assault, and we know that needs to be investigated immediately. When that case comes through and I approve it, I'm not going to wait for that to get transcribed, because even under the best of circumstances, it may take 24 hours, you know, for records techs to get in there, and, you know, because we're getting 300 in, you know, per day constantly, I'm going to automatically call records, give them that case number and say, I need this case transcribed immediately, so that the detectives will have access to it, or I'll email the detective sergeant and say, hey, when you get in this morning, this case, we just took it. If it's not transcribed yet, you know, get it transcribed so you can access it. The officer on the street wouldn't really need to access the Versadex information. That's more for, like I said, the investigators. All the information about a previous call should come through dispatch if they've been called to that residence in the past. There is a case where in the chance that there was a GEO that was within the last few days, that may not be available to them because it hadn't worked through the transcription queue yet, and they couldn't pull up that actual general offense. But if it's supplementals and stuff that are coming through later, if the GEO's in there, they can still access that through PIMS and look at that report and say, yeah, a week ago, they were out there on an assault call. They may not have all the follow-up information because subs may be hanging out there in the transcription queue, but there is a chance that could happen where, an officer isn't privy to some, and that's the risk we're talking about, and it's an unacceptable risk. But for the road officer, they're going to be using the RMS system on their computers. They're going to be using PIMS. The Versadex, and I never learned to use Versadex until I went to the gang unit, and then I went to become a gang sergeant where I started using Versadex a lot more. When I was on the road as an officer, I never used Versadex. We've had Versadex for 20, 25 years. I would just use the applications on the computer, which are PIMS and our report writing system to enter the reports in. But Versadex, more of an investigative tool, but road officers, if they have that training, can use Versadex because you can access more information easily within it.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I didn't get which officer was just speaking?
This was, Deputy Chief Hildebrand.
Hildebrand. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I want to know also, Councilmember Zavon, can I keep going, please?
Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
Haven't really heard anything from John Schneebeck this morning. Lieutenant Parvin, I would like to know, is he in there with you, no longer working remotely and transcribing records during this process?
I'm sitting right here. I don't transcribe. I'm in the executive office over the division. I don't transcribe reports.
Not even in a crisis?
Not even in a crisis. I am not trained to transcribe reports.
And I'm not either. This is Lieutenant Parvin again. But I will say, since I've been here, I have not seen John working from home. He's been in the office every day. He's been with me helping fix these issues. And I worked for him before 5 years ago when I was in records, and I thought records worked very smoothly with us running it.
Okay, that's great news. One thing, I did see a couple people on the call. I don't know if we have some people here from the homicide unit. I know Rob McGregor or Bob Wesner. If one of you could jump in. I have also discovered that, and if I am wrong, please correct me. I have also discovered that there were 4 cases, major crime cases from May to June of 2021, maybe felony menacing type cases that never got investigated due to this backlog. And it's possible now that it might be too late. Can I get Bob Wesner, Rob McGregor, can I get somebody to comment on that? Is there truth to this?
Hello, I'm Bob Wesner.
Get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, there's a lot of feedback. Bob.
How about now?
Same thing. I don't.
Lieutenant Weisner, make sure that you don't have 2 connections going, like a phone going along with your computer audio.
Yeah, maybe shut everything else off.
One more time. With the echo, I'm going to come down. So just give me 2 minutes to be there.
We can come back to you maybe if you want to get off the call and try to come back on. We can come back to you because I want clarification on these 4 cases. Okay, I think he's trying that. Okay, so I have a question. I don't know if this, I don't know if Greg Hayes is on this call or if Jim, you can answer this, Jason Batchelor, whomever. When we talk about needing to raise the salary of our professionals in the records department, when we talk about needing more staff, and of course, we're still waiting for the rest of this PRI report to tell us, you know, what it is that we need, if anything at all. But Lieutenant Parvin sounds pretty confident that we need to address this and we need to get some more staff in there. So I just want to ask now, does that come out of adding those personnel? Would that go into the police budget? Would that be a part of the police budget?
That's right. That would be a part of the police budget. And I think Lieutenant Parvin said that our human resources department is looking right now at market rates for these positions to make sure that we can be competitive. And as you know, we've been through this with our 911 center and several other areas of the city because wages are changing so quickly and the competition is difficult. And as Lieutenant Parvin says, it's a different time in terms of number of applications that we're getting. We used to be, get hundreds of applications and pick the cream of the crop, and it's a different time. So HR is working on that right now.
Sure. So I just want to make sure, because I've been told a lot that, and during the course of my campaign and since being in office, that we have way too much money invested in the police budget. And so I just want to clarify that to address these staffing needs and to get the correct number of staff in this department and possibly others, we need to actually increase the police budget.
Yeah, and as we've said, when we get the report from PRI, we'll see what their recommendation is in terms of staffing. The important thing here is too, as we've said, is that we be smart with how we staff in terms of how we deploy records technicians, use them, and that our processes and organization and everything is top notch.
And back in October, when the approval was made for 5 FTEs for the records department, did we hire 5, or how many did we hire, if any at all, back in October?
And I'm not sure what the status of that is at this point. Maybe John Schneebeck can address that.
We're sitting at 8 vacancies, 1 supervisor that was approved in the 2022 and 7 FTEs. We have not been able to get them filled. 2 were offered jobs this last week.
So this was going back, John, to this approval for the 5 FTEs in October. We haven't been able to fill any of those.
Correct. The city manager gave us the authority to go ahead and do it higher as soon as we could. As Lieutenant Parvin mentioned, we have pretty good turnover. Not a good thing. We have higher turnover in records, and so it's a consistent churn process for us. Probably running into the 13 to 20% as you think about attrition percents. That's been kind of our experience over time. It goes up and down, but it is kind of difficult staffing because it's a 24/7. It works through all of your holidays and all. It's a police department function working every day of every year on every hour of every day. So it is a little taxing. You just like your 911, you have a lot of turnover. These 24-hour operations that don't necessarily have weekends or holidays off can sometimes just create staffing consistencies. I suspect maybe one of the recommendations might be coming out to have an overhire so that we're handling the churn. So if I need to have 40 people in production at a time, I'm constantly striving to get 45 in place so that that turnover is not causing delays and backups as I'm trying to do the hiring process. It will take us usually 4 months to hire somebody once we get things started. So it's quite a process to go through backgrounds and for that person not to drop out in between or disqualified during that background process. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And so then I want to talk about this original request went out in April asking for additional staffing. Jim just said that he thought at that time it was a bigger priority to maybe look at the issue, processes and the problems that were going on in records than at that time to put out a notice, to hire, maybe to approve those 5 FTEs back in April. And what you're telling me now is we've had this open and these vacancies available, been trying to hire since October. I mean, John, where chicken and egg type thing, do you think if we would have put, and this is your opinion, do you think if we would have put out to hire those 5 FTEs in April instead of October, do you think that would have made a difference? Or do you think that because we've had this out since October to hire, and we're still not able to hire, do you think it truly highlights a problem with our process?
I think basically all the efforts that are going into this at this point in time and where we sit today is really the kind of emphasis and resources that really need to be put towards this, because if we've got just, we're fighting ourselves on processes, we need to get that fixed. We might have been a little bit faster at getting somebody. I'm not quite positive if he would have gave the thumbs up in April. I do not think I would have cleared my processes up by October anyway. I would have had a few more people. I might not have been quite as far behind. I don't think I would have had this issue solved, if that helped answer that.
So the processes, that's the biggest issue right now, still.
Yeah, I think when PRI helps us really get aligned and gets a roadmap, we'll analyze that roadmap to a T and get ourselves right-sized and staffed and moving forward in cooperation with the components. We're a hub in the middle of reports coming in, reports going to courts, reports going to citizens. And once we get some better processes in place, some software, some technology, services to our citizens, to our next request is going to be a big deal. A lot of the stuff that we've been struggling to get in place is really starting to come together now. So we still have a lot of work to do, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that, John.
May I add to that? This is Lieutenant Barber again. I just want to say that I've had lots of conversations with the Chief's office, and I want to just mention the human aspect is not lost on us within records. The issues within records were not the fault of the technicians. They've worked very hard. They're very professional. We're very aware of their morale, and part of eliminating turnover is pay. Part of it is the hiring process, making sure we're staffed correctly, but a big part of it is making sure that they know that they're valued and that they enjoy coming to work and that their morale is high. So we've had lots of conversations with HR. Wellness is very involved. We're looking at things within records to make their work product better based on their happiness. So that aspect is very important. I really wanted to come across that this is not the technician's fault. They're very good employees.
Lieutenant Parvin, I appreciate you saying that, and because it actually was highlighted in the audit that was presented to us a month ago by Michelle about the culture in the records department and the fact that there was this kind of a dent in morale, which we've seen. And I'm anxious to see. I know Jim, and I don't know what the update is, and we can talk about it at a separate time on the citywide culture survey. But I know that Michelle highlighted that in her report. And so I appreciate all the work that you are doing and continue to do to get us caught up and addressing this really serious issue. I want to ask, I know somebody was trying to adjust their mic to answer Councilmember Durinsky's previous question. I want to see if they're available to do that because we are running long on time. So I want to move to the next items here shortly, but I do want that question answered if possible.
Sure. How's the mic now?
There we go.
Perfect.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm Lieutenant Bob Wessner, Major Crimes Lieutenant. With me to your left on your screen is Commander McGregor. So, Ms. Jawinski, if you could just go ahead and repeat your question.
Yeah, thank you. So some conversations that I've been having surrounding this and of course reading these articles that the Sentinel has been putting out. I have personally discovered, and I'm not sure that the Sentinel actually has an investigative reporter on their staff, so I just kind of want to help them out with this. But I've discovered that there actually, in fact, were 4 cases, major crime cases from May to June of 2021 that are at the major crimes level and maybe felony menacing, and that they never got investigated due to the backlog. And now at this time, it may be too late. Correct me if that is wrong, or please elaborate.
Sure. So I'm going to reflect back onto Michelle Crawford's statement about the timeline of records and transcription queue. So this is prior to her internal audit. What was brought to my attention by my staff in the spring of 21 was that we did have some major crime cases that were delayed through transcription a week or two until those reports were transcribed and given to us. And remember, going back to that time, this is not a time where we had workarounds in place. So this caused those workarounds to take place. We had 4 crimes against children cases. We did have 2 cases in major crimes homicide unit. They were not homicides. They were missing person reports that were taken and just not transcribed in a timely manner to get to us to start those investigations. All of the investigations, however, were investigated. So none of them were not investigated. They were all investigated. They were just a delay in getting back to those folks. In fact, we had a couple people in the crimes against children that actually reached out to us asking the status of their cases, and unfortunately we had to advise them we did not have those yet. So we went in looking for them and found them. This goes back to the comments made by Deputy Chief Hildebrand. A lot of times at that particular time period, we would not know there's stuff in transcription queue to look at unless we knew about the case ahead of time. So my staff and the workaround that we created was to daily look at that transcription queue for major crime cases. That's what we do here in major crimes to alleviate some of this. And then we put in those check measures that I believe Lieutenant Parvin talked about, which was, and I believe Deputy Chief as well, that we requested our supervisors on patrol that when they got major crime cases that they would send emails or make telephone notifications to us so we could go in and find those and access them. Yes, we have access to the transcription queue. We trained our admin specialist in major crimes, has the ability to transcribe reports. So we're able to do that a lot differently than other units in the department.
Can you repeat that? What were these 4 crimes? 2 were missing persons, and what are the other 2?
The other 4 were crimes against children cases.
So 4 crimes against children and 2 missing persons cases were held up by a week, 2 weeks, because of this backlog?
Yes, prior to the audit done by Michelle Crawford. So I think this may have been what spawned that conversation. I know I worked with Michelle a great deal in dispatch a few years ago when we had some issues there, and that audit turned out to be very fruitful. And I think that's the same process that the chief's office ventured with this particular issue.
And Bob, just to clarify one more thing, you found out about some of these cases because the victims were calling in?
Yes, that's accurate.
And did you ever take this up your chain of command, and who, if so, who did you speak with, your higher ups?
So Commander McGregor is my first chain of command, so he was aware. He took it forward through the chief's office, and I specifically reached out to John Schneebeck because it deals with our records department, and he's like the division chief in charge of there. So I reached out to him. We had great dialogue, and those workarounds that we put into place were developed through working with him.
Because of these 6 cases that were held up, 4 cases against children, and 2 missing persons cases held up by at least a week or 2 because of this backlog.
Yes, I don't know of any cases that have been affected by what we've changed since we made that workaround in July of last year. We've been able to keep track of all those going forward and accessing the transcription queue and making sure that they get assigned immediately. So we haven't had any homicides affected by crimes against children, internet crimes against children, domestic violence, or sex crimes that I'm aware of.
I mean, that's wonderful, Bob, and that's a thank God for me. But 4 crimes against children and 2 missing persons held up by a week or 2. I can't, in my right mind, imagine how that is being downplayed in this in this circumstance, and how many gaps in the system we had to let it get that far. But I appreciate you, coming forward.
Okay, with that, was there another question?
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. I want to talk a little bit about prioritization here, because it was stated earlier that major crimes were not impacted by the delay, but what I'm hearing right now is that we've had missing persons and crimes against children that potentially were delayed. So are those not considered major crimes? Because it was my understanding from what was said earlier that, serious offenses where other people were endangered were bumped up to the top. So can someone please explain what's going on here?
I can comment to that, Lieutenant Wessner here. So major crimes does involve what I mentioned earlier: sexual assault on children, internet crimes against children. It's our classification for our central investigative team, which does homicides as well. That doesn't mean that there's other crime. Our DV unit is part of our major crimes unit now that wasn't in the past. We developed that about 1.5 years ago. We put them under major crimes, but there are major crimes that occur at a district level, as far as like felonies, if you will. But when we look at specifically major crimes, we're looking at victim rights crimes and stuff where Victim Rights Act applies to, and that kind of thing. If that helps.
A bit. Thank you.
Other questions?
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think, to what Councilmember Marcano was saying, I think everybody is in agreement, the media, the police department, city manager, that this did not affect any murder cases, any homicide cases. But to say that this didn't create a lag for major crimes, I'm happy that this is out there, as sad as it is to hear. In my opinion, a missing person or a child against a crime is in fact a major crime, and it did have an impact on that. So I thank you very much again, Officer McGregor and Bob Wessner. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you all for that. And I'm gonna, unless there's any other questions from the committee members, I'm gonna go ahead and move to the next thing. But before I do, I just want to say to Lieutenant Parvins, to all of everybody who is stepping up right now and helping us to diminish this backlog, thank you. And to Michelle, for bringing forward the audit. This is a very serious issue, and it sounds like we're going to get through this current backlog and have a process in place to ensure that it never happens again, because as we've heard very clearly from PRI, that it's these types of failures in records management that could lead to a significant tragedy. Our city has already been home to significant tragedies, and we never want to see it again on our watch. And so I appreciate everybody stepping up to take this very serious issue seriously, despite the very contrived efforts to minimize it. So with that, I want to go ahead and kick it over to my colleague, Councilmember Marcano, to talk about city-owned impounds and are exploring that option. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Zvonek. And thank you to everyone who presented earlier as well. That was a very fascinating conversation. So this matter before us, it pertains to exploring the feasibility of a city-owned impound lot. I've heard from several constituents who have been victims of motor vehicle theft that there are steep fees, for them to get their vehicle back. To me, that's unconscionable. It's like adding insult to injury. These folks have been victimized. They're then having to pay even more money to a private organization to retrieve their vehicle. I actually have someone who I am familiar with who is $2,600 in the hole, who has medical issues, so they were not able to in a timely fashion, get their car out of impound. So now they're going to lose it at auction next week, just as an example. This is something that a lot of Aurorans face. In the presentation that was provided to me by APD, we're spending, or rather our residents are being, charged upwards of $1 million a year on top of the other costs, in terms of lost wages and things of that nature that being victim to a motor vehicle theft may cause. So from my perspective, this is something that we can do to provide some material relief to our residents, not just from motor vehicle thefts, but also aid in other city operations where APD and other law enforcement agencies may be involved in retrieving vehicles. The goal would be to finance it at cost until it's paid off, and then run it basically at cost at that point, and hence the feasibility study that is included in the resolution. And with that, if there are any members of APD or the city attorney's office who'd like to chime in, I'm happy to have them do so as well.
Does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Pete,
So, obviously I'm in an acting role just for a short period of time remaining, but we would absolutely support that. Long term, I think it's the right thing for our residents. It's a complicated matter to get in place. It takes some time and some research to do it right, but absolutely would support something like that. I think it would improve service delivery based on what I know about some of our wait times, just waiting for tows and things. I think it would improve efficiencies by our officers on the street as well. And again, to reiterate, I think it's the right thing to do by the community as well, looking long term.
Any other?
Yep,
go ahead, Pete.
No, just real quick, when Councilmember Marcano came to Megan and I to kind of talk about the legalities of it, we looked into it because we have a contract with a third-party vendor. We have no ability to waive any fees that the vendor, they have a business to run, they have property, they've got to charge for storage. So the only way to have some, independence on what we do with our citizens is to own our impound lot. And just across the country, I will tell you that a lot of large cities do have their own impound lot because of this issue. So just to put some perspective there.
Yeah. Councilmember Zvonek, I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So Councilmember Marcano, so your vision on this is certainly for people that have had their vehicle stolen and recovered, we would waive those fees. But vehicles that are involved in crimes, things like that, towed because of a DUI, or I don't know if we would get into, towed, if a business calls and says these people are parked in my handicap, whatever, what have you. Those instances, would those people pay to get their car out of impound, or are you thinking this is just a free lot?
So this is effectively for city operations and public safety operations. So I would want it to be for, again, victims of motor vehicle theft, but any other public safety agency that has to, capture a vehicle, I guess for lack of a better word, they currently rent lots from a for-profit lot. This would actually help, in partnership with those agencies, defray some of those costs as well. I don't really think that public safety should have a profit motive engaged in it, especially when we're talking about victims of crime. So that's why I think this is in the best interest of our residents.
Oh, I'm certainly not looking at this as like a profit motivation. I just want to make sure that vehicles that are involved in a crime, if one of the concerns here is the delay, officers waiting for tow trucks and stuff like that. If an officer is waiting for a tow truck in the case of a DUI, then I think that same thing would imply for that vehicle to be towed. I just am not sure that I'm okay with that person getting their vehicle out for free.
Yeah. Again, that was the intent was to help victims here. So if someone's an offender, I think that's a separate conversation that, we can have with staff as they're putting together their proposal.
Other questions for Councilmember Marcano?
I have another question. So this is just 100% city owned and taxpayer paid for, only for victims. So it would only be a victim's lot. So not at all to help in covering the costs on this and having the taxpayers 100% foot the bill because of our lack of police and our increased crime rates. We can explore the option of vehicles involved in crimes going to this lot as well, and those vehicles having to be paid for to be taken out of impound, you're not open to talking about that at all?
To clarify, Councilmember Jurinski, in section 2, this is the vision is to operate this at a net zero cost. So it's not going to be subsidized. There will still be some costs incurred. I just want to give deference, obviously, to victims so that they are paying the bare minimum, which I'd like to get that as close to zero as possible. When we're talking about other situations like you've described, that's part of what I will leave to staff to kind of create a fee schedule for, because there are going to be costs obviously with building this, right? So we want to recover those costs, and I think that might be an excellent source, frankly, to recover some of those costs.
And Councilmember Jurinski, there is, for lack of a better term, I hate to call it like this, but under current state statute in every state, these towing and impound lots are a cash cow, and I use that because of the money they make. So the idea would be is to use the fee structure, which Councilmember Marcano would want staff to come up with what we would charge the offenders. We're not looking at waiving fees and storage and everything for everybody. It's just for the victim. We wouldn't be using 2 lots. The feasibility study would be, let's look at see if we had our own lot and we ran it strictly off fees with no impact to taxpayers. How could we? What how much for the land would cost to build it out and so forth. So we're going to just take over the private lot portion and do everything in-house, and then maybe even work with some other law enforcement agencies to do it. But again, the goal that Councilmember Marcano kind of stressed to us is not use tax dollars, but not to make a profit either, just to find that zero, net zero balance.
Yeah, and I am absolutely on board with that. What Chris Jewell had said in his argument for this is officers waiting on tow trucks and times for tow trucks to get to, in this case, it would be stolen and recovered vehicles. But I'm assuming that officers are also waiting on tow trucks involved in other crimes, DUIs, police chases, whatever, what have you. So if that is one of the arguments, then I think we need to explore all of that. I don't want our officers out there waiting for tow trucks, for anything, if that is in fact the argument. And I think that was my point.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, is there any objection to moving this forward to study session? Okay, seeing none.
Thanks, Jill.
Yep. Next up, we have the Public Safety Partnership Overview.
Hello, Councilmember Savanik. I know we went pretty long on the records thing, so we're going to keep this kind of brief, but I want you to get kind of a snapshot of what the Public Safety Partnership's about. Before I start, I think the Public Safety Committee would be interested in hearing, last night we did a street operation on Colfax, Beeler area, where we've seen an increase in crime. We recovered 6 firearms, 5 significant arrests, and a search warrant was executed last night in that area. They're continuing that operation tonight, so I wanted you to hear that firsthand, that was a successful operation, and 6 guns were taken off the street that were in the hands of people that shouldn't be possessing them or would use those in a shooting. So that was a very successful operation. Going into the National Public Safety Partnership, I want to give you a little overview of how we became involved in this. Last spring, there was an application process. It's kind of like a grant application. The Public Safety Partnership is a program under the Department of Justice, sponsored through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Their mission or focus is to reduce violent crime and also provide resources and capabilities and capacities to agencies that are struggling with crime issues or processes or things like that. So to improve those types of things. So we applied for that grant. It's like a grant application. In September of 2021, we were awarded and we were accepted into the program. We are one of 10 sites for 2021. This dates back about 4 to 5 years. Every year, about 10 sites are selected. We were one of the 10 for 2021. We're very unique in the fact that some of the things that have been brought into other cities like NIBIN, CJIC, so the NIBIN program where you do the shell casing analysis and stuff like that, we already have some of those things in place. So this was really an opportunity for Aurora to push the envelope of innovation. And I think the DOJ saw that opportunity, and that's why we were selected. Plus, we, like many cities within the nation, were struggling with violent crime, an increase in violent crime. So this was a great opportunity for the city of Aurora and the Aurora Police Department. So with that, it's a 3-year program. The first year goes through an assessment process. We select categories that we want an assessment completed in. One of our primary ones is gun violence and youth violence related and non-fatal shooting. Actually, this week we have the SMEs, subject matter experts in youth violence here. They've been meeting and doing interviews with community members, with people from the agency, with key stakeholders. I'm here with Chief Susan Mannheimer. She's our strategic site liaison, so she's in town for that. So she's going to introduce herself here in just a second. So our first year's assessments, we're doing the violence, and that's our primary one. We're doing a grants assessment, which will help us how to write for federal grants and get funding for special projects within the Aurora Police Department. We're doing a crime analysis assessment. We found that we can do much better in collecting data and getting that data pushed out to investigators or officers on the street. So we're looking at a crime analysis assessment. We're also doing a technology assessment, which should hopefully open the door for us to look at some real innovative technology out there used in law enforcement and bring that to the city of Aurora. We're also doing a strategic messaging assessment, and that's both internal and external, and really works with our public communications and how the police department messages out to the community or internally. So we're working through that assessment. We actually started that assessment along with the youth violence assessment. The other assessments will come a little bit later. So our first year's assessments, then we transition into some real strategic planning to see what we want to bring to bear within the Aurora Police Department. Then there's opportunities for us to apply for federal grants to help support those initiatives. So they actually have someone who specializes in grant writing as a national expert on it. So we will coordinate with them to apply for some federal grant funding to help stand up some of those initiatives. And then our third year is really implementation. Throughout that year, there will be peer visits where we'll actually get to go to other cities that are doing things really well in whatever area we're assessing right now and see what might work for the Aurora Police Department, because not everything that's used, we're very unique. The city of Aurora and the Aurora Police Department is unique, and it's not like other agencies or cities. So we have to see what works best for us and works best for our community. And really the whole key to this is our partnership and collaboration with all of these entities that have a stake in our crime problem. So that it includes the schools, our federal partners in the U.S. Attorney's Office, our judicial district partners with our DAs in both the 17th and 18th Judicial District, our hospitals that have violence interruption programs within those, so our mental health programs, our youth violence prevention program, our co-responder program, and the MRAT, which is the paramedic and clinician response team. So those are just a few of the key stakeholders that are involved in these conversations when we meet. And really, we're trying to leverage all of our stakeholders to take ownership in our violent crime problem and our youth violence problem and find solutions to those problems and hopefully reduce crime, build trust within the community in a collaborative effort, and partner with the community in that. So with that being said, that was a real down and dirty overview of the program. I'll turn it over to Chief Mannheimer so she can introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her background and a little bit about the program.
Great. Thank you all for your time and attention. I know you've had a very long meeting, so I'll try and be brief and succinct as well. I'm not going to go over too much more of the program. I think the chief did an excellent job in really summing it up for you. You also have a packet that was sent to you with further background information. My contact information is there as well. Just a couple of thoughts, and reflections as we're on the ground and have really been doing the work. And as the deputy chief said, I'm very much about action-oriented goals and not waiting a year or two in strategic planning. So I was going to tell you just a little bit about some of what we're focusing on right now. A little bit about my background, just so you understand my bona fides. I have been a 38-year police officer, the last 22 of which has been as a chief in 4 different agencies, 2 major cities in the Bay Area, San Francisco and Oakland, and then 2 medium-sized cities, more similar to Aurora in that they are adjacent to the major urban area and have the same sort of urban issues around crime and development with sort of more limited resources other than the major cities. So one of the things that I've dedicated my career to is violent crime suppression and juvenile crime prevention. And as I retired this past year, I was selected by the Department of Justice to lead the team into Aurora. Each of these 20 cities has a site selected team leader. I'll be that leader for you for the next 3 years. And really, coming out of several agencies where I was an interim during troubled times, I can just tell you as a reflection after serving as interim chief that when police departments or really any agencies go through these turbulent times, the rebound is a powerful and effective time for growth and can be really the launching off point for practices, policies, and systems that will get them back on a new and refreshed track. So this is really an opportune time. One might say during leadership transitions, how do you really provide that level of, sort of consistency? And I would say that this is really an opportune time to come in and support the department as long as they are supported. And I can tell you that their command staff, their deep bench remains active, engaged, and is not missing a beat in this really vital youth-focused crime prevention effort that we are prioritizing. And I think we are prioritizing this basically because this is mirrored across the country. And I think really the dedicated resources and expertise of the PSP really will help you all curate what those goals and those ultimate programs will be. You have a lot of key assets already in place, credit to you all, as well as to the department and the city for really putting these wraparound services, prevention, and intervention in place. And I can say that one of the things that we've really done in these every 2-week all partners meetings is sort of strengthen those protocols, safety, and other concerns that the schools, the hospitals, the community, and the community voice is very important here in all that you are doing, so that that engagement and that support is aligned with where the community is on the ground with their lived experience. So I know there's been a lot of really discussion in this committee as well, and really looking at sort of what is that balance of intervention, prevention, and suppression efforts. And I think one of the things that we're seeing really across the country is what's working is that given the incredible amount of violence, the alternative response models and the youth violence prevention programs that you all already are developing and putting in place puts you really ahead of many other cities in finding that balance of how you can take an overwhelmed criminal justice and juvenile justice system and provide these other alternative responses and what I call the off-ramps for those that will take them that do not have to go down the already overwhelmed and overworked police and prosecution and criminal justice system track, right? You're putting in place these other alternatives, and that will be a big part and key to what we're doing to make sure that we integrate all the important work Jessica Prosser's group is doing and all that you all have put in place too, to make sure that when we get to those individuals who do not avail themselves of all of these alternatives that we will be offering, there is accountability and capacity and effective suppression efforts coupled with prosecution efforts to really hold accountability to those individuals. So really, PSP comes in with a front row seat on what's working, what's not working, and brings all that in to the equation, convenes these bi-weekly meetings, and we've already seen a tremendous amount of progress, basically because sometimes these are the first times that all these partners are getting together and really looking through how the system works. Where's the integration? Where's the warm handoffs? And how do we really focus effectively on meeting the goals of crime reduction and safety for the city of Aurora? And I think I just want to reassure you as well that these key tenets of community policing, constitutional policing, and procedural justice, that your consent decree and your community values and expectations will align better once we really have that coordinated systems approach where we have better outcomes for everyone. So that once it gets to the police capacity to actually do the suppression, the enforcement, and the prosecution, we're able to do that in a way that is more along the lines of the capabilities and systems they've developed. So we'll be working on the ground here. I am really appreciative of the fact that even during these times of transition and the many other challenges the department and the city are facing, they have not missed a beat and are very, very dedicated and on point with their crime reduction efforts along with the other services that will help them really achieve these goals for the city. So we'll be generating updates and reports on a quarterly basis, but just know that we're on the ground every 2 weeks with all the partners and already have seen things such as really refining the shooting review, working with the hospitals and the schools, and now really bringing in the U.S. attorney and the district attorneys to work on how we work around some of the challenges in prosecution and accountability. So we're excited. PSP and the DOJ and BJA think that Aurora is uniquely situated to be a model and a leader for many other cities across the country that are more in this medium-sized agency with urban, specific problems of great volume of violent crime. And we look forward to doing the work with you all. I am here interviewing. You should all have in your email queue a specific invitation to share any input, concerns, and we do have a guided interview we're doing as we do the youth violence assessment. Everyone has been incredible to work with internally, externally, community. Everyone's pretty excited about sort of looking at this overall strategic plan to get us all online and coordinated with our services and our suppression. So thank you for your time. I know it's a long meeting and I remain here and will remain engaged.
Thank you for that. Any questions? If not, I have one, and it's whether or not that through this partnership, one of the unique challenges that's fairly new to Colorado and as a result of a law that passed last year, where it expanded the types of felons who could possess weapons and to include drug dealers and auto thefts. And I know that is still a federal violation, but not a state. And so is there any opportunity for grant funding to do some sort of IGA between the DAs and the Department of Justice so that we can, prosecute those cases at a federal level? Because, being able to, for these previous offenders, or what is it? Possession of weapon by previous offenders, right? That expansion from the state legislature to include drug dealers and car thefts is, I believe, a significant public safety concern to our city. And I just wonder if there's anything through this partnership where grant funding might be available to create that sort of IGA with the district attorneys.
Right. And so thank you. Many states have laws that we're trying to sort of work around as we see this tide of violent crime and gun crime really escalating throughout the country. And I first really learned of Mark Hildebrandt's tenacity when he brought up this whole issue of how do we pivot from state prosecution for sort of, federal has always gone sort of the worst of the worst cases with gun crime. But now being unable to prosecute some cases through the state, is there a way that we can really leverage both grants and the federal attorneys in this? And so he's been a leader in this. I defer to him at this point.
Yeah, so some things we're trying to do, we were working with both DA's offices about getting special assistant U.S. attorneys. There's sauces that they're basically appointed to that position. They hold it for a short period of time, but they're able to prosecute cases federally. Right now, the U.S. Attorney's Office's bandwidth is narrow. That's why they're so selective in a lot of the cases they get. But if they get help from either the district attorney's offices or even through the city attorney's office, potentially these special U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, they could take more cases. So we've already been in talks with city management about the potential through the city attorney's office. We've been in contact with both judicial districts. Right now, from my understanding, both the 18th and 17th have not committed to sending anyone over there, even though we've talked about potentially backfilling those with grant funding or applying for grants so they could backfill spots. Even with that, I think they're very, I don't know why, they're very conservative in their approach and not wanting to dedicate some resources to the U.S. Attorney's Office to do that. But we're continuing to work through those conversations, trying to get the help to the U.S. Attorney's Office they need so they can take some more of these cases federally. Just recently, 50 additional charges were added to the list that are included under that. Unfortunately, motor vehicle theft and narcotics related prior felony convictions aren't applicable. Those are two key ones that we really wanted to see within there that aren't within there. And that's a majority of we know that if they have drug convictions or that they're stealing cars, and then they're armed with a gun, there's a high likelihood they're going to be involved in a crime of violence. So we don't want them possessing firearms. So those would be key ones that we would be looking at prosecuting through the federal system if we can get the U.S. Attorney's Office some help.
Yeah, and so just for situational awareness, the DA Kellner had reached out to me and to Deputy City Manager Batchelor about the possibility of doing something. I think his concern, and I don't want to misstate what he's saying, but is the bandwidth issue. I think that he would be open to it if there was grant funding to fund a position within his office. Would be an additional prosecutor that could do that federal role. But I don't think he has, because of all the other, they have their own version of backlogs, his own prosecutors that he wouldn't want to dedicate to that. And I think that that's the challenge. But I clearly think for the city of Aurora, having some answer to this is a critical need, because as you just stated, it's those types of prior felony offenses that if they have a weapon as well, that there's a higher likelihood that there's going to be a violent crime. So anything we can do to mitigate that and potentially leverage this partnership, I think would be worth exploring.
Okay.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you for your presentation, and we'll go into the Aurora Fire and Rescue Compliance Engine Management Tool presentation.
Hello, I'm Deputy Chief Kane Hills. I oversee the Inspections and Investigations Division. If I could have the ability to share my screen, please. Thank you. Okay, the mission of our group is to protect lives and property of the citizens and visitors to the city from preventable fire, as well as ensuring the safest environment by upholding the International Fire Code. We did adopt the 2021 IFC, which took effect on January 15th of this year. Our values: respect, integrity, professionalism, and customer service. What are we comprised of? The inspections division is comprised of a fire marshal and deputy chief, that's myself, a commander, lieutenant, 6 fire inspectors, and 15 additional trained personnel that actually investigate origin and cause for every fire in the city of Aurora. So what our vision is with this presentation, and it's informational, is that there is a software records tool, and it's called Compliance Engine. And this management tool will give us the ability to streamline fire and life safety code compliance tracking, which will result in a safer and more compliant citizen specific to commercial occupancies. And really, this is important to understand that this is not an outsourcing for fire inspections. Fire inspections are a facet of this, but not an outsourcing. So the Compliance Engine is a simple internet-based tool for fire prevention bureaus to track and drive inspection and testing code compliance for fire suppression and notification systems. It's a secure platform, web-based. Third-party service providers who inspect, test, and maintain the fire protection systems submit those reports via Brycer's web portal for direct access then by our personnel to ensure compliance. So this is the compliance management tool versus the fire inspectors. So again, not an outsourcing for IFC fire inspection requirements of commercial occupancies. Fire inspections still must be performed by certified fire inspectors. So when they go into an occupancy to inspect for fire code violations, not only are we looking for compliance related to the suppression systems and alerting systems, but we also look for, and these are just examples, the code book is quite robust, but egress doors, panic hardware, renovations that potentially occurred that we were unaware of, storage amounts of flammable gases and liquids, exit signs, elevator, boiler certs. We go in and actually physically inspect the marijuana facilities. So again, there is so much more to a fire inspection rather than just validating that these occupancies perform their annual, biannual, or every 5-year test related to a specific suppression system or alerting system. So let me go back here, sorry. What does the compliance engine management, what is it? So This facilitates a more efficient review and tracking and follow-up process with occupancies to correct deficiencies and maintain fire systems. It provides a team to administer hard and soft copy notifications to the occupancies. They initially assist with building the AFR database and perform follow-up calls to facilitate testing and maintenance at the correct intervals. It drives 100% compliance with fire and life safety codes. Currently, our estimate for the city of Aurora is approximately 40% compliant with these systems. We have approximately 10,000 occupancies, and keep in mind that not all occupancies have alerting or suppression systems within them. So this process electronically collects, organizes, and tracks fire and life safety test results. So depending on the type of system it is, there are certain requirements in their National Fire Code of when those systems need to be tested. In addition, if there's anything identified through the testing process or something happens prior to that that facilitates or requires a repair, that's how we would be notified. So it maximizes resources, it saves times and streamlines communication. And I want to talk about how we receive our reporting now. So we have a third-party inspection / testing company that goes into commercial occupancies based on those intervals on the alarm type, and they do their testing or repair. They then write that information down on a hard copy, come back to the office. They then upload that information, or an administrative assistant does so. Then they email that report to our life safety email group, which we receive anywhere from 10 to 30 a week, depending on the time frame. Then our folks have to create another file on their desktop labeled whichever company that's facilitating the repair or the maintenance. And then we take that and add that into the Excel piece. So you could see the redundancy in the amount of work, not only for the service provider, but also for Aurora Fire folks. So these are the types of systems I'm referring to. And some commercial properties have them, some don't. Some have a combination of all of them. It just depends on the occupancy type. So we're talking about fire alarm systems, automatic fire sprinklers, standpipes, fire pumps, commercial hood systems, phone systems, and generators. So currently, and this has been a long process, approximately 3 years that we have evaluated this in this group. And I'll get to the steps prior to actually why we want to implement it now. So the landscape currently is 95% of authorities having jurisdiction, that's the AHJ, cannot inspect every building annually. And the fire code doesn't provide for that requirement either. It depends on the occupancy type. 99% also don't know exactly what type of systems in each building. We wouldn't catch it if there was a renovation and it was signed off. If we went back 2 years after that occurred, we wouldn't have knowledge that that occurred in that building. 40% of life safety systems do not get inspected annually. That is true. Fire code officials spend 29% of the time administratively preparing to, or pertaining to, excuse me, inspection, testing, and maintenance. So this is a really cool comparison. This is from Phoenix Fire, and they implemented the compliance engine management tool January 2020. So initially in their database, they have approximately 7,756 unique premises. That means occupancies with some type of alarm systems or notification systems that I referenced earlier. After this robust evaluation by the compliance engine group, they then found 11,328 unique premises, which then in those occupancies had roughly 15,716 fire protective systems. So, you know, we've never really had a third-party audit outside of the city come in and actually evaluate all commercial occupancies, and they have a very streamlined process to do so. And it would also help us update our database as well as the building department's database, considering not only did we just recently transfer from the Amanda platform to Excel platform, But then our group specifically during the COVID timeframe, because we couldn't go in and inspect these commercial occupancies, we actually drove around, believe it or not, to identify occupancy type in the city and to verify that in the Excel system. So it was a very time-consuming process. So let's look at the success for the Phoenix Fire Department. Program start date, it was 89% past due compliance, and 11% of all commercial occupancies in Phoenix were compliant. After 12 months of developing and implementing this program, then they had 53% past due, 47% compliant. Then they have a projection for 24 months and a projection for 36 months. And you can see it gradually goes up after 36 months to being 88% compliant. Obviously, the goal here is to have 100% compliance. So now the big question, the cost model. Might be surprising, but there is no cost for the city of Aurora. The charge for business owners is nothing. Where the money is made here is the people that perform the actual maintenance and repair on alarm systems is charged by the compliance engine. So if they submit a report to the compliance engine, they charge them $15 for each report. Now, if you evaluate that $15 charge, keep in mind the process I communicated earlier about these vendors going to the occupancy, doing the test, performing the test, coming back to the office, submitting a report to the administrative folks, emailing that report to our folks uploading it to a folder and to Excel. It seems like a nominal fee. And again, we've costed this out over the last 3 years. We did meet with a couple other vendors that provide the same service, and no one could come close to this fee, the process, the robustness, and all of those things that we're looking for. It delivers compliance, resulting in new businesses and maintenance revenue for third-party contractors. Going back to the service provided, and I referenced Centos and Frontier because those are the two people we namely deal with. They go and they perform a hood suppression test or repair on that. A hood inspection test is approximately $550. So if that $550 fee was assessed to the business owner, which it should be, then Frontier or Centos would then be charged $15 by the Brycer compliance engine to upload their report so we have access to it. Notable local partners. Boulder, West Metro, Brighton, Arvada, Windsor, Evergreen, and Thornton, Blackhawk. There's quite a few folks in the metro area that use it. Here's some notable national partners, and I won't go through each of them. You guys can look at that and peruse it. Here are the intended outcomes. Code compliance and increased safety, reduction of false alarms. That's a big one, because if the alarm systems maintain at the correct interval, obviously there will be less false alarms that occur that we have to respond to and go out and then write an order notice to be fixed. That's forwarded up to our group. Our group then forwards it out to the occupancy owner. They have to reach Centos and or Frontier or the other providers to come out and actually repair the system. It's also to have a systematic, accurate tracking of all safety systems within the city of Aurora. And return next year, we want to provide an update on the intended outcomes. But really quick, if I can digress back to the process, and most of you might have a question, why didn't you implement this years ago? Well, there were a lot of things that needed to be developed prior to actually having this in place. One of which was identifying occupancy types in the city of Aurora, getting on an inspection cycle that's reflective of the International Fire Code with the amount of personnel we had. Thirdly was we ran a predictive analysis, it was a chi-squared analysis, to identify what occupancies are more likely to have fires occur in them, which drove our decision to schedule our occupancy inspections the way we did. So it was data driven. So once we get all of those things in place, and then the biggest one was transferring data migration, script development, all of those things, a mobile app from Amanda platform to Excel. And 3 years ago, well, 2 years ago, we were still hard copy performing inspections. And we transitioned to fully automated, a mobile app on tablets, which have been dispersed to all the fire crews throughout the city, as well as our inspections group that go out, and we have real-time updating for inspection processes, which we never had. So we had to get all of those things in place. This is kind of the last 3-year iteration of multiple iterations that will truly make a more streamlined and efficient process. So that is my presentation. If there are any questions, please.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yep, go ahead.
I have a couple questions, and this was a great presentation, but I want to find out, so when we're talking about business inspections, the way it is now, when the fire inspections happen, if there is a problem with our Ansel system or our hood system, or something fails compliance on the fire inspection, we as the business owners in Aurora are able to use our own vendors, some of which we've had, contracts with and agreements with for years, for those repairs on the Ansel systems, the hood systems, any of these systems, the phone system. Are you saying that with this program that would take that choice away from the business owners, and that we would have to use the vendors that you just announced?
No, absolutely not. Those are just the two main ones we deal with. I use them as an example. But you as a business owner, or anyone that wants to utilize a different vendor to come and perform those tests that you referenced, certainly can do that. Absolutely.
Okay, and I have one more question. And you had said, that this is no cost to the business owner, but to clarify, these fire inspections, there is a fee to business owners.
So if you're talking about fire inspections versus the compliance engine, those are two different things.
Okay.
So if these folks are going out and doing the hood tests, verification of compliance with suppression systems, no. But we charge a fee, the fire inspections folks, when we physically go there and spend time in the occupancy based on square footage, et cetera. So no.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Seeing that, thanks for this presentation. I guess is the ask here to move this forward to study session?
Well, that's kind of a gray area, and maybe Angela could help out in the legal department, because there was no required RFP process because it's no fee.
Got it.
And in our contractual agreement that we will work on with them it could be terminated at any time. There's no length of time, and everything we write in there will be what we want. They just want to provide the service. So I guess the question to Angela then would be, does this need to move forward and a contractual agreement be presented before moving forward? Or because we have so much latitude in the contractual agreement and there's no cost to the city through RFP processes, do we need to?
Somebody, yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, this is Angela Garcia. I think at this point, we would take a look at that contractual agreement, settle the terms. And yes, because there is no dollar value associated with the contract, I don't believe it needs to go to study session.
Okay.
Unless Chief Gray wishes it to.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure, the great information, appreciate the presentation. I just wanted to make sure that there was no action needed in terms of us saying good to go, which I doubt you'd have had any resistance anyhow, but if you don't need to, not a problem.
And Councilmember Zvonek, just real quickly, our thought process on presenting this information is actually twofold. First of all, to acknowledge the work that Chief Hills and his team has done over the last 2 years to get us in a better position to make sure that we are ensuring that our residents are kept safe. That was one. And then also the second piece is just to make sure that you were informed so that if any business owners had any questions, you'd be aware of this process. So again, that was our thought process on presenting this information to the Public Safety Committee. So again, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
One last quick comment. Sorry, we did vet this out through the Business Advisory Board, allowed them to have input over the last months to a year to raise any concern, to ensure that we were collaborative. So I wanted to share that as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, last item on our agenda for today, item 4E, is the photo radar enforcement. And it looks like is it Lieutenant Bennett is the presenter?
Yeah, good morning. Lieutenant Bennett with the APD traffic section. I'm the traffic commander. Very briefly, one option to address the speeding complaint that I'm sure everybody in this committee gets frequently from their constituents is we have speeding in our residential neighborhoods. We need to stop. And we run into problems of both traffic control devices. You know, can we put in the speed bumps? Can we slow things down or whatever? And enforcement's always an option. So we want to present a one possibility, which is it's photo radar on the agenda, but really that's kind of a misnomer. What you're going to hear about from one vendor today is a photo laser system, which is actually more accurate and able to distinguish between different vehicles and different lanes of traffic. This is just one option. What we're looking for here is once the presentation is over, we've answered any questions, this would move forward to study session. There would be a significant chunk of upfront money that would need to be spent on the equipment. And there would also have to be a discussion about FTEs. There have to be dedicated police officers, sworn officers, because of municipal code. State law says that it could be an employee of the police department, but municipal code requires that it's a sworn officer that's involved in this process in order for a summons to be issued or a citation to be issued. So there is an FTE conversation to be had and some money that needs to be discussed moving forward. Briefly, we'd be able to, this would be mobile systems. These would not be fixed systems. We'd be able to target specific areas that have speeding complaints under the state law that would limit where we could put them. So for instance, we can't put them on 225 and capture people because the state law says that they have to be in residential neighborhoods. And that means a municipal street that has mostly residences on both sides of the street and a speed limit of 35 miles an hour or under. We can put them in construction zones and we can put them in school zones. We can also put them on other municipal streets that have a park, a municipal park that borders one side or the other. So for example, Mississippi, between Chambers and Buckley, there's Rocky Ridge Park. We could put one of these monitoring devices out there because of the park, but we couldn't put it in some other places. But as we know, speeding is a significant concern for our citizens, and it is a significant contributor to a lot of crashes. And so this would be one option. I'll turn it over to Scott Stewart from one of our vendors. Scott is from Conduit. I'll let him do an introduction. Bringing in Conduit because they're our previous vendor for the photo red light system that we used to have. They're also Denver's provider, so they're a big provider in the region.
Thanks, Lieutenant Bennett. Appreciate it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. And then can somebody allow me to share my screen as well? Okay, let's see. All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Again, Scott Stewart, I'm a senior sales executive here with Conduit, and I'll take you through who Conduit is here in just a second. I know we had 30 minutes scheduled. Look, I'll cut that in half because I know that we're running a little bit short on time, but essentially there's three ways that you get at speeding, right? It's enforcement, it's education, and it's engineering. And we're here to talk about the enforcement component. And this is yet one additional tool that a lot of jurisdictions have used across the country to try to get at this epidemic, which is excessive speeding. It's not just happening in Aurora, it's happening in multiple jurisdictions across the country. So, why am I not advancing here? There we go. Do a real quick overview of Conduit, talk about the current challenges that we've heard from the city, as well as other places in the United States. Quick system overview, talk about some of the success that we've had with clients and some of the benefits that they're seeing, and then of course do a little Q&A. So Conduent, we're one of the largest providers. We're actually one of the largest business process outsource companies in the world. We do about $4 billion a year annually with 60,000 employees. We operate worldwide in 24 different countries. There are three sectors that we do business in Conduent: government, commercial, and transportation. I, of course, work in the transportation division, and we have roughly half of all US-based tolling providers, companies go through us. So we have large tolling contracts with places like the city of San Francisco, the state of New York. We process about $2.5 billion a year for our clients. And then we run one out of every 4 top city, county, and state-run photo enforcement operations. So we're one of the largest providers out there. Here's some of the things that we've heard from not only conversations that we've had with law enforcement in the city of Aurora, but other places across the country. Massive increases in speeding and dangerous driving. We see this street racing is a theme that we hear pretty consistently. And I'll show you some statistics across the country and in your state specifically in just a minute. Staffing issues are commonplace. We hear this all the time with law enforcement agencies that we speak to, and it's having an impact in their ability to do proactive enforcement, especially as far as traffic safety is concerned. The lieutenant mentioned that the constituents are coming to them and saying that, we'd like to see an increase in speed enforcement. That's challenging when you have limited resources to be able to do that. And then you can see a quote from National Highway Traffic Safety Association. Roughly 26% of all traffic fatalities are attributed to speeding. I don't know if you guys know this statistic, but when a vehicle hits a pedestrian at doing 20 miles per hour, there's only about a 5% chance that collision will end in a fatality. When a vehicle is traveling 40 miles per hour, there's an 80% chance that collision will end in a fatality. And unfortunately, the numbers really prove that out. You can see that we've got some statistics here from the federal government. They didn't produce stats yet for 2021, but you can see about a 7% increase in fatal crashes across the country. And in Colorado, for a 3-year period, it's about a 16% increase. And we should note that you can see an increase in the state of Colorado in 2020 versus 2019. As we know, COVID was in full effect in 2020, and the number of vehicle miles traveled dropped significantly in 2020, yet the fatalities increased in 2020. What happened was, as there were fewer vehicles on the roadways, drivers began to use these open roadways as their own personal, NASCAR tracks. And unfortunately, that led to an increase in fatalities. You can see the 2 most populous counties that Aurora resides in, both Arapahoe and Adams, had increases during that 3-year period. And then the most unfortunate statistic is that 3-year stat line that you see on the city of Aurora specifically, with the number of fatalities increasing year after year, and a 54% increase over that 3-year time frame. So unfortunately, the statistics prove it out. Now I'm going to show this, and I may pause it a couple of times. Hopefully you can see this video. Okay, so the system, one of the systems that we use and one of the vendors that we partner with is a company called Bytronic. They have a laser-based system that is deployed in multiple places across the world. In fact, they use this system. They've installed 16,000 of these systems, and I'm going to pause it here for a second. And that they've installed 11,000 of these systems and have another 16,000 on order, 300 of which are with our clients here in North America. So it's a laser-based system versus traditional radar, and you'll find that let me fast forward that. You'll find that when we look at some of the statistics that I'll show you, it is significantly more accurate in capturing higher vehicle counts than radar-based systems. Radar uses radio wavelengths to track vehicles, and those radio wavelengths have the ability to bounce off of objects. This takes 154 laser beams and scans across a roadway. That roadway can be up to 6 lanes of traffic. It gives you very specific data, such as the lane that violating vehicle was in, the mile per hour, give or take plus or minus 1 mile per hour, the time that violation occurred, and then it can do vehicle classification, cars, trucks, and very soon we'll be able to do motorcycle classification as well. It has a violating identifier category. It's called a trapezoid that goes over the rear of the vehicle. So from an evidentiary standpoint, it holds up in court. And in fact, we've actually issued over 10 million violations using this system in North America, and have never had a single violation overturned due to a technical challenge. So it's incredibly accurate. It's a small form factor, so it can be installed in a myriad of locations and design types. Incredibly high capture rate. We face this off against competitive radar-based systems, and it captures 2 to 6 times more violations. So with that, you're able to issue more citations and change a greater number of driver behavior. It cannot operate outside the calibration period, another reason why it stands up so well in court. And it's really suited well for high volume areas. So if you have vehicles, for example, that are traveling on 2 and 3 lane roadways, and they may be side by side, it will issue a citation for both of those vehicles, even in situations where one vehicle may be slightly occluded from the other. As the lieutenant mentioned, probably the best way to get at the type of enforcement you want to do would be in a equipped vehicle. We provide all of that. The equipment can be completely enclosed, so it's not exposed to certain weather conditions inside the vehicle. And then the operator is inside of that vehicle. In the state of Colorado, the violation does need to be witnessed by somebody. So there would be an operator inside that vehicle at all times. And then this is an example of that trapezoid that I talked about that basically puts this indicator over the violating vehicle. So it's essentially indisputable evidence that really should not and cannot be overturned in court. And it takes out the question of, there are 2 vehicles in that image. How do you know which one was mine? How do you know that I was the violator? This gives indisputable evidence. We have a host of reporting packages that we provide with all of our clients that show things like how many vehicle passes, how many violators, how many issuable violations did you do in that particular month, how many were dismissed, and for what reason were they dismissed, clarity of plate, snow on the plate, what have you. So a ton of reporting information that we can provide. We also have what's called this Conduit Business Intelligence, which is an analytics tool. This, frankly, is being used by the Colorado District Attorney's Council as a data aggregation tool that allows them to take information from every law enforcement agency across the state and bring it into one proof source. It can give you pie charts, histograms, and it's just another reporting source and another tool that's at your use. It also can provide key performance indicators. If the system is falling behind certain performance metrics, then law enforcement or designated officials can be notified, and maybe there's an accident at that site because it normally produces 30 violations a day, and now it's producing 5. It can be outfitted with GPS locators so you know where the vehicle is at all times. And then in some of our red light installations, we actually provide live video feeds so you can see what's happening at that intersection at all times. Not necessarily the case in a mobile installation, but it does have the ability to do that. Conduent is a full turnkey service provider. We've been doing violation processing for over 30 years, and we've been doing photo enforcement for roughly 25 years. So we do everything from processing, reviewing, quality check on the violation. We do payment processing, collecting all payment types from the citizens and violators, printing and mailing those violations. We do court scheduling. We can provide expert witness testimony, and we do all of the program maintenance. And we also do public education and awareness, which I'd recommend in this program as it would be brand new for the city of Aurora. A couple success cases. One of our clients in Maryland, they've been using this system. They started with a pilot in 2009 and went into full program mode in 2010. When they first started, 7 out of every 100 drivers were exceeding the speed limit by 12 miles per hour or more. Since that time, when the pilot went to full program mode, now only 1 out of every 10 drivers exceed that speed limit by 12 miles per hour or more, accounting for a 90% reduction. The important thing is 10, 12 years later, that statistic still remains today. So we went from basically 7% of the drivers doing excessive speeding to now only 1% of the drivers. The recidivism rate is incredibly low also. If you get a ticket in one of these programs, most of our programs across the country, less than 10% of the population receive a second ticket. You can see in Denver, when they deploy at a certain location for 5 consecutive days or more, they see a 21% reduction in excessive speeding. And then finally, this is our Portland customer. This is one of our longest running customers in all of North America. You can see that period between 86 and 95 was that period before automated enforcement was introduced. And then in 96, they began a photo radar program using mobile speed vans. And you can see the significant reduction in fatal crashes in the city. That trend continued over the next 10-year period, and they just don't have the data yet for that next 10-year period produced. But it's produced a reduction in crashes. It's allowed them to reallocate resources. It's safe, impartial, and unbiased. The camera doesn't see color. It sees a violation. Doesn't care how rich you are. It cares if you violated the law. And it's revenue positive outcomes. It was mentioned by the lieutenant that there's a cost associated with the pilot. We've actually done the numbers, and based on our anticipated volumes that we project that you would get, and that's based on similar municipalities across the country, you would see net positive revenues that you could use to fund other public safety campaigns. And then finally, there's a quote down there from the section safety manager for Portland Bureau of Transportation, attributing the speed cameras to having a significant reduction in overall speeds. It works so effectively that in their last RFP that we recompeted on and re-won the business, they are doubling the size of their program in Portland. So that's how effective they think that the program has been for them. So I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So it highlighted that this program is really for like highways, interstates, and high density areas. And for us in Aurora, I'm not saying that we don't have speeding going on our highways. We certainly do. But all these accident, updates and these crashes that I'm reading about almost sadly daily at this point, and the ones really that are including fatalities, I'm seeing those come, on just our roads within the city.
Sure.
So what is there any compatibility for this program within the city and not just on our highways?
No, absolutely. As the lieutenant mentioned, I think the intent is to deploy these systems where the areas where you have the areas of most need, which is in residential areas and in school zones. The point in some of those slides is that the system is so sophisticated that it's able to catch multiple violators regardless of the roadway type or how many vehicles are or are not in that specific area. So it will work in any type. Also, radar has a hard time with detecting vehicles around curves or hills. So I live in Southern California. We have a pretty extensive park system in the area where I live. And a lot of those parks are right in the middle of residential areas where they have, like a center park and like in an oval type shape or a circular type shape. And the residential streets go around that park. So you've got curved roads in nature. This system has the ability to significantly better than radar to detect violations in those types of areas. But in answer to your question, it'll work in any environment.
And is there anything that flashes? Because that was a big concern. We had these photo red light cameras, and these things flashed so bright,
Sure.
that at nighttime, I think it really caused a problem for drivers. Is there any type of flashing light with this?
Yeah, so great question. And you do need to illuminate the picture of the vehicle and license plate to have an evidence package that stands up in court. However, there's ways to mitigate the brightness of that flash. So we can install equipment with low-level flashes. We can put covers on the flashes that give more of an amber hue. We also can do infrared, which completely removes the ability to flash. It just, the downside of that is you don't produce a color image by using infrared, but we can work with the city to determine what will work best for you guys and then outfit it appropriately.
Okay, I have one last question. Is this a cost package, one cost package, and you tell us this is the cost and this is what we offer, or is there any like a la carte options here that we can say, look, this plan, your basic plan is great, but we need to add X amount, more of these for different roads in our city?
Yeah, typically what we've done initially, and we haven't presented costs to any of the folks that we've been working with to this point, because we wanted to get kind of buy-in that this is a direction that you guys felt was of value. But the way that we've built the model thus far is there's a fixed cost per vehicle, and then we include everything that it takes from A to Z to capture the violation, send out the penalty assessment notice, any follow-up notices that are necessary. In the state of Colorado, you also have to do process serve. So you have to physically serve that notice to the violator. And we've included all of that in a fixed one lump sum fee. If you do decide to go to full program down the road, then that may be modified a little bit, and we will work with you to determine what fee structure works best for the city.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
You may have answered my question. I was curious about the citation issuing of it. You say it has to be physically served, or can it just be automatically mailed out?
Yeah, so there's an initial notice identifying the violator of the infraction. If the violator does not respond to that, then there's something that's called the penalty assessment notice. That can either be mailed, it could be mailed via certified mail, or it can be hand delivered by a process server. So, and then that process server we subcontract with a process server in Colorado that does a certain amount of attempts under contract. And then if they cannot reach that person after, I think it's 5 attempts, then they stop. Just so you know, the payment rate for our program in Denver is between 80 and 82% of the violations that are sent out and or hand served are eventually paid, 80 to 82% of them.
Okay. And then, it's okay if I ask another question. So Colorado law states that these need to be manned, full-time equivalent, right? So devil's advocate might say, well, why not just put a patrol car and do good old-fashioned radar? But sounds like this is more efficient in that it can capture more speeders. Is that correct?
Yeah, great question. And let me clarify. Colorado law state that the violation must be witnessed by a peace officer or city or county employee. I believe the lieutenant referred to a municipal law that you have in the city that says that a peace officer must be involved in either witnessing the violation or reviewing the violation. So there has to be, according to your city charter, there's got to be law enforcement involved at some point. So, but Colorado law does state specifically that somebody does have to physically witness the violation. So what happens is that you have a person in that vehicle, a vehicle operator, the system triggers that a violation has occurred. Then that person checks off, they basically hit pause on the system. They check off on like a log that says, I physically witnessed that blue Toyota, Corolla commit a violation at 9:36 a.m. That process should take 30 seconds to a minute. And then they re-engage, they hit that button again, and the system goes back into enforcement. Lieutenant Bennett can keep me honest on this, but to pull over and issue a traffic citation, probably takes 20 minutes on average. You could issue literally, with that process I just identified, 60 violations, right? 60 violations in an hour. So there's simply, look, the most effective way to curb dangerous driving behavior is to put a sworn, uniformed law enforcement official everywhere and have them pull citizens over for traffic infractions. That's just unrealistic. So that's why so many cities have decided to go this route. And while there was a push to step away from automated enforcement, particularly red light enforcement years ago, and of course that happened within the city of Aurora, not that the program was not doing the job, that was a citizen complaint. There's been a big push towards bringing in automated speed enforcement across the country. New York just issued an RFP where they're going to do automated enforcement in work zones. Connecticut is doing the same thing. We're doing a pilot in Delaware for the Department of Transportation. Minnesota is considering legislation. California has introduced a bill to add automated enforcement on arterial and residential streets in specific cities from a pilot perspective. An RFI was just released at a smaller municipality in Bremerton, Washington, that has red light today. They're going to add speed enforcement. So the trend in the country is, look, we don't have enough resources to do this in a traditional manner. We need to look at tools like automation.
One last question. Does the vehicle need to be marked as a patrol vehicle?
You have to have a sign conspicuously placed within 300 feet of the automated enforcement system. I don't remember if the vehicle has to be marked, but we don't have a program in the country where it's not marked. It's just, that's shady, if you will, if it's not marked. And we're about putting a program in place that's sustainable and effective. So I don't remember what the law says, but if the law doesn't say that, we would strongly urge the city to mark the vehicle, because that's just fair to the citizen.
Any other questions? I guess my only question is maybe for staff, is that if as we potentially move this forward, I assume as a consideration, it seems to me that there's two questions here. One, whether or not as a city we want to have a policy in place that allows for photo enforcement for speeding. And then secondly, because of the cost related to this FTE that would be required to implement it, is there an RFP process? And because I don't know whether or not there are other vendors in this space or not that provide this service, but I assume that would be a next step. And is there somebody on staff who could clarify that for me?
Councilmember, this is Jason Batchelor. You're correct. We would likely recommend an RFP process. And then there's some policy discussions for council. You all have highlighted some of them. We would want to bring you out some of the details. One of the things we probably also would want to talk to you about as a policy matter is, do we want, as has been noted, municipal code requires officers. We could also ask council if council wants to amend municipal code to allow civilians to operate these vans, as you've heard from the vendor, that does happen in other cities. That would comply with state law. It's a municipal requirement. So there's certainly some policy decisions that we would need from council. And we would also bring forward that RFP process.
Yeah, so for given the new rule that we put in place, it seems like that this is one of those instances where it'd be a policy decision would be required first, and my preference would be to see a member of council, if assuming they want to make that change. I personally would not want to see that change happen, but if one of my colleagues did, have them bring forward that policy, that required, but I guess it's not required, if we could operate within it, knowing that it would incur that additional cost of having a sworn officer. But I guess the next step, if I'm not mistaken, is to determine whether or not there's a member of council who would want to bring forward that potential policy change to study session in order to have that conversation. And assuming that the decision is made yes, then we would go forward with some sort of an RFP for the enforcement of it.
If I could make a comment on that as well, what we did in the state of Maryland before we started their program is they selected us to do the pilot. They ran the pilot for 1 year. The purpose of the pilot was to test the efficacy of the program, to make sure that the results proved out, which it did. At that point, they then issued a competitive RFP to go into a long-term contract. So that's the way that the state of Maryland did it. Other jurisdictions have done that as well. Also, on the point of law enforcement, the state of Oregon recently passed legislation that removed the requirement of law enforcement to be able to be required to do final review of the citation, because they were finding that they were having so many citations that were being issued that they didn't have enough law enforcement to be able to review those citations. I'm not saying that we advocate for that, but there's precedent where that's happened in other jurisdictions across the country.
Okay. Other questions?
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yep. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me speak with them on the committee. I wanted to know from the presenter if, or from Mr. Stewart, looking at the example you're giving here with the city of Portland, I'm just curious, were there any other improvements that Portland had been working on during that same time period to their infrastructure, traffic calming initiatives and things of that nature?
They did, and it's a good question. In a select number of areas, they did do this roadway reduction and constriction, which some cities have found that have slowed speeds. That was not done in what they recognize as high-speed corridors or high crash corridors. They did do that in other areas, and for example, they did that in an area where we used to have a red light camera posted, and that did have a moderate impact in reducing the number of violations there. And so they're asking us to put up a camera at a different location. So yeah, there are engineering changes. As I mentioned in the beginning, that's one of the potential options. Unfortunately, that option proves out typically to be incredibly expensive, but it is an option.
All right. Yeah, I would agree. It is definitely more expensive, but from what I have read and what I have seen firsthand, it's by far the most effective method, effectively making speeding something that is just not really prohibited or allowed by the built environment. But I want to thank you for the presentation. You definitely given me a couple things to think about.
Thank you.
I guess my final question is just, and maybe this is for Jason and team, is as we explore this, you know, I don't want to view this as a revenue generator, as a way to just take more money from our citizens. I want to make sure that public safety is really the primary concern. So has there been a needs assessment in terms of like, yes, we have, this is something that our city needs at this time?
I'll let Lieutenant Bennett speak to this, but as he noted in his entry, that speeding is one of the major concerns we hear from you all, and you all hear from our residents. And so enforcement is a challenge, and this is certainly much more efficient. So I think that's why we brought this forward. It is clearly a policy question for council. So that's why we brought it forward, and it's to address those concerns we hear from citizens. And I guess if you're okay, Lieutenant Bennett, if you have any numbers in terms of the number of complaints or things like that you all are receiving.
I do not have specific numbers of complaints, but I think a good place to highlight that Councilmember Jurinski has recently been involved in with the Yale just east of Buckley, where it turns down into Dartmouth. And we had that hit the media pretty hard with that car that was crashed into the pond over there. That area there's no good place to run concealed speed enforcement, right? I can't hide a motorcycle over there and pull over offenders. It's not subject to a place where we can easily do traffic calming measures with built infrastructures. The road is already fairly narrow. We cannot put any speed bumps in there. Talking to Public Works on that's because of the corridor it can't be managed like that. So enforcement is kind of our only option, but it doesn't have a good way to do that for long term. Whereas if we can target areas such as that with a campaign of a photo enforcement, that does help us out a lot. One of the advantages that we have here would be the ability to target specific areas and try to reduce speeding in those particular areas. And is this the end all be all? No, but it could be part of a solution that multi-pronged to fix this problem. As we know, a lot of our crashes are involving speed these days. The tragic crash this past Friday night with the family, it's Chambers and 6th, was speed is definitely a factor there, right? So speeding is definitely something that we need to address. This is just one opportunity to help address that problem.
Okay. I guess my preference then would be to bring forward to a study session a conversation about whether or not photo enforcement is the policy that we would want to pursue as a city. And then at that point, if there's consensus with the council, I guess we could have a conversation about running a pilot program or whatever the next step may be. But maybe the first step is just to simply get a sense from the rest of my colleagues whether or not this type of policy shift is something that they would want to move forward with.
Are you asking us or?
Nope, just stating if there's any pushback. That's yeah. Any objection to that?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, then that is the direction to staff. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I appreciate everybody for sticking with us on this marathon public safety meeting. It was obviously added the first item that we talked about out of a need to really address something that was urgent to our community. So I appreciate everybody for their participation. And again, just want to say thank you to everybody who's stepping up to help clear that backlog. Our next meeting is May 12th, 8:30 a.m. and look forward to seeing you all then. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.